Story 1. Dawn on the Nile, a scribe's day in Thebes. Ra's solar bark crested the eastern horizon, spilling molten gold across the Nile's dark waters. In Thebes, the Hemet city stirred. Along the riverbank, fishermen chanted as they hauled flax nets shimmering with thrashing bolty fish. Potters' wheels spun rhythmically near irrigation canals, fingers shaping cool, wet Nile clay into amphorae destined for olive oil storage. Within a modest mud brick home plastered with ochre clay, young Katie, a temple scribe's apprentice, rose from his woven reed mat. The pre-dawn chill clung to the air as his mother, Neset, knelt beside a granite quern stone, grinding golden emmer wheat into coarse flour. The scrape, scrape, scrape echoed like a heartbeat. Terracotta jars brimmed with dried dates, pungent garlic bulbs, and precious honeycomb, offerings for Karnak's gods. Katie splashed his face from a limestone Hesman basin, whispering gratitude to Happy, god of the inundation, may your waters nourish the black land anew. He fastened a bleached linen shendit kilt around his waist, its edges frayed but clean. A leather pouch holding sharpened reed pens, dried cakes of red ochre and black soot ink, and scrap papyrus sheets hung from his belt. Stepping into the dusty alley, Thebes engulfed him, the braying of donkeys laden with grain sacks destined for pharaohs' granaries, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of farmers clearing silt from irrigation ditches under the watchful eyes of coal-eyed overseers wielding palm-rib staffs. The scent of baking bread from communal ovens mingled with the musk of damp earth. Katie hurried past vibrant frescoes depicting Osiris' judgment, his leather sandals slapping against sun-baked mud bricks toward Karnak Temple's colossal first pylon. At the towering gateway, guards draped in leopard pelts inspected laborers hauling alabaster jars of frankincense resin. Katie bowed low before his mentor, the royal scribe Amenhotep, in the cool, shadowed majesty of the hypostyle hall. 134 colossal papyrus-shaped columns soared toward the lapis lazuli ceiling. Precision is piety, boy, Amenhotep rasped, unfurling a calfskin scroll detailing grain yields. An error in the god's accounts starves souls in the field of reeds. Katie's reed pen scratched swiftly across fresh papyrus, streamlined hieratic script flowing like the river's current. Columns detailed emmer from Upper Egyptian estates, barley from Delta farms. Between towering pillars carved with lotus and papyrus motifs, shaven-headed wab priests swung bronze censers, clouds of myrrh smoke coiling around colossal statues of Ammonius Ra as dawn hymns echoed, "Hail to thee, mighty bull of the two lands." By midday, Ra blazed mercilessly. Katie joined laborers in a fig grove's blessed shade near the docks. They shared coarse peasant bread, strips of salted Nile perch, and jugs of sour Hecate beer. A scarred storyteller wove tales of Isis resurrecting Osiris with magic spells from her moon-silver tongue. A sandal maker rubbed blistered feet stained with tamarind dye. A potter praised the rich Kemet clay. It holds the river's memory. Katie marveled. Each calloused hand upheld Ma'at, the cosmic balance binding farmer to pharaoh. Silence fell like a shroud as the per-merit tax collector arrived, papyrus scrolls crackling in his grip. Katie verified quotas: 10 jars of beer for temple festivals, 20 bolts of fine linen for priestly robes, 50 copper chisels for tomb cutters in the Valley of the Kings. One farmer collapsed, weeping, "The inundation, it only kissed my fields. Half the yield." Katie recorded the deficit, emmer wheat. 150 sacks owed, 70 delivered, but drew a tiny ankh beside the entry. A silent prayer, "May Osiris grant mercy." As Ra's bark sank toward the western mountains, Amenhotep led Katie to the chaotic docks. A cedarwood ship from Nubia disgorged treasures, gleaming elephant tusks, ebony logs dark as night, deerskin sacks heavy with alluvial gold dust, tribute for Pharaoh Hatshepsut, foremost of noble ladies. Katie's pen flew, ivory, 12 tusks, ebony, 8 logs, gold dust, 30 deben weight. Ochre ink stained his fingertips crimson. Nearby, SW&W physician packed a sailor's scorpion wound with honey-soaked linen while chanting to circuit. Children rattled Senate pieces on a limestone quay, their game board scratched into stone. Amenhotep lifted a pyramid-shaped deben weight carved from diorite. Truth in measure, Katie. Without it, The granaries empty, the army starves, Ma'at crumbles. Katie balanced gold dust against the standard weight, beads of sweat tracing his spine beneath the linen. Dusk bled into indigo. Nesset lit sesame oil lamps in terracotta sesh bowls, casting flickering shadows across walls painted with protective jed pillars and blue lotus blooms. They shared stewed lentils fragrant with cumin and leeks, split a precious pomegranate, its ruby seeds like captured stars. Soft words flowed about Katie's sister, apprenticed to a royal weaver in distant Memphis. Afterward, Katie plucked hymns to Thoth, ibis-headed god of scribes, on a three-stringed Nefer lyre. Beyond the mud walls, Karnak's great bronze tambourine drums throbbed like a heartbeat. Desert jackals howled in the Theban hills. He pressed his glazed faience amulet of Bes, dwarf god of households, to his lips. Tomorrow, contracts for illiterate mer traders. Tonight, dreams of hieroglyphs swirling in the Milky Way's celestial river. Thebes slept. Farmers whispered prayers to Renanudit for rain. Potters smoothed wet clay destined to hold organs in a noble's tomb. And scribes, living conduits of jet, eternity, dipped reeds into ink, guarding Egypt's breath upon papyrus. For in the silence of the scroll, in the sweat on the farmer's brow, in the scent of baking bread along the Nile, immortality lived. Story 2, Earth and Fire, a potter's trial in Deir el-Medina. The desert wind, Kebwi, scoured the cliffs above the Valley of the Kings, swirling ochre dust over the high walls of Set Ma'at, place of truth, the artisan's village now called Deir el-Medina. Nefret, master potter of the Hemit Guild, stirred before dawn. Her husband Nakt, a Sesh Kadut, draftsman painter, for the royal tombs, snored lightly on their palm fiber mattress. She slid past their daughters, Ipi and Hennet, curled on reed mats beneath a fresco of Bes. Outside, the fading torch of the Medjay night watchman cast long shadows. Nefret's calloused feet touched the packed earth floor. Today demanded perfection, for canopic jars for the vizier Passeer's burial, vessels to hold his liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines for eternity. In her courtyard workshop, Nefret plunged her arms into a Kratut's trough filled with thick, gray Nile silt, Kemet, the black land's sacred clay. She kneaded it rhythmically with her heels, removing pebbles and root fibers, chanting softly, Knum, ram-headed god of the potter's wheel, maker of bodies on your divine turntable, bless this earth that it may hold the Ka. Dawn bled crimson over the Theban peaks. Nakt emerged, kissing her brow, his kohl-lined eyes crinkling. May Ta steady your hands, he murmured, slinging his leather roll of brushes and ochre pigments over his shoulder before joining the procession of artisans trudging toward the hidden wadi. Nefret's daughters awoke. 7-year-old Ipi ground malachite on a flat grinding stone, Mosa, creating turquoise powder for Nakt's frescoes. 5-year-old Hennet shaped a tiny hippopotamus from clay scraps. The village erupted in sound. The tap-tap-tap of stone carvers' copper chisels on limestone ostraca, the clack-clack of horizontal looms under vine-shaded porches, the braying of donkeys hauling water from the communal well. Nefret centered a lump of clay on her wooden kickwheel, Henu. She pressed her thumbs deep, pulling the walls upward with wet palms. The jar for Imsidi, human-headed guardian of the liver, took shape, its curves swelling like the Nile in flood. Smooth as a lotus stem, she whispered. By mid-morning, Ra's heat hammered the kiln yard. Nefret stacked 20 Ashapti servant figurines, answerers, for the vizier's afterlife labors, inside her brick furnace. Her apprentice Mena, sweat dripping onto his linen kilt, fed acacia logs into the firebox. Flames roared, turning the brickwork orange. At the well, women traded news while lowering clay hydri. The vizier's wife demands cobalt blue glaze. The royal workshops took all the azurite. Nefret frowned. Her precious cobalt reserve was dwindling. A sudden gust whipped sand into her eyes. Habub, a desert storm loomed. She and Mena scrambled to seal the kiln's upper vents with reed mats soaked in Nile water. Noon, the Kenbet council bell clanged. Villagers gathered at the ration storehouse. Scribe Pasea, no relation to the vizier, unrolled his papyrus ledger. Asterisk, Nefret, daughter of Ka, for Sax Emmer wheat, 2 jars barley beer, 1 bundle shut onions, 1 hin measure of merit fish oil, payment for 10 ushabtis delivered to the overseer of works. Asterisk IP tugged Nefret's kilt. Mother, the Delta trader has honeycomb. Nefret bartered. A polished carnelian bead Nacht had gifted her, scavenged from a tomb chip, for a small block of wild honey. For Thoth's festival, she promised. Disaster struck. A child's scream pierced the air. Young Kamudi, chasing a stray goat, had tumbled into an unmarked, half-dug tomb shaft. Nefret sprinted, her potter's apron still tied, pushing through the crowd gathering at the pit's edge. "Lower me," she demanded. Villagers gripped a palm fiber rope. Nefret descended into cool, silent darkness, her oil lamp flickering. 10 feet down, Kamudi whimpered beside a half-carved limestone sarcophagus. Painted eyes of Horus glared from the walls. A fresco of Anubis weighing a heart shimmered in the lamplight. "Hush, little scarab," Nefret soothed, wrapping him in her shawl. "The ancestors guard this place. They smile on brave boys." Back in the blinding sun, Kamudi's mother pressed a faience Wedgetai amulet into Nefret's palm. "Protection for your kindness." Too late for the kiln. Monsoon rain, rare, violent, slashed from the sky. Icy droplets hissed against the furnace's superheated bricks. Nefret watched in horror as steam billowed from the vents. Knum, no! Cooling too fast meant cracks, warping, disaster. When the storm passed, she and Mena Pride opened the kiln. Heat radiated in waves. 1 canopic jar, the lid for Duamuf, jackal-headed guardian of the stomach, bore a hairline fracture snaking from rim to base. Nefret's heart sank. A flawed vessel risked the vizier's spirit starving in the field of reeds. Mena touched her arm. "The god sees your effort. We'll refire it with double prayers." Among the ashes, 20 ushabtis gleamed intact, their cobalt blue glaze as deep as the night sky. Dusk, Nacht returned, fingers stained green from malachite, red from ochre. Nefret served fata, stale bread soaked in cumin-scented lentils, drizzled with the precious honey. Hennet presented a doll woven from tomb linen scraps. Nacht sketched Nefret on a pottery shard, her strong hands, the worry line between her brows, the curve of her smile. "For eternity, my Nebitper, lady of the house," he said. Outside, flute songs drifted as villagers celebrated Thoth's feast. Nefret mended a cracked beer jug with acacia resin, while Nacht described painting Osiris' resurrection, green skin for rebirth, like the flood soaking the fields. The desert wind rose again, whispering through the valley. Nefret placed a perfect ushabti near the hearth, a tiny sentinel for their own journey west. In Deir el-Medina, where artists breathed soul into stone walls and potters shaped eternity from river mud, even the cracks held stories. For Ma'at, cosmic balance, lived not in flawless things, but in resilient hands and mended vessels. Story 3. Flood and Fury, a farmer's covenant with the Nile. The season of Akay, inundation, had dawned, yet the Nile moved with lethargy. Mena, a fella, peasant farmer, of Persoptu village in the delta's labyrinthine marshes, waded through tepid water barely ankle-deep at dawn's first blush. His feet sank into cold, unyielding clay where chest-high Kemet, sacred black silt, should have swirled. Above, Soptit, the star Sirius, blazed fiercely, her helical rising always heralded Happy's life-giving flood. Instead, the river exhaled a thin, listless stream. "The gods sipped this year like nobles tasting wine," Mena rasped, watching his 15-year-old son Katie patch a crumbling dike with palm frond mats weighted with mud bricks. Without the inundation's rich sediment, famine would stalk Kemet, the black land itself. Their family's Gezira, alluvial island plot, lay cracked and thirsty. Only stagnant pools festered, thick with skittering water beetles and whining mosquitoes. Mena's wife Tanis, her linen shift clinging to her legs, waited nearby, scattering precious barley seed onto exposed mudflats, a desperate gamble against Ra's coming fury. Their 8-year-old daughter Iset scooped river snails into a cracked best jar, supper if the woven fish traps hung empty. The air hung thick with the sour stench of decaying papyrus roots and despair. Not one frog sings for Hecate, Tanis whispered, invoking the frog-headed goddess of fertility and birth. Mid-morning, Ra's eye blazed white-hot. Menna and Katie strained at the shaduf, the ancient counterweight irrigation lever groaning like a wounded hippo. They heaved against the Nile's thin current, hauling muddy water into crumbling mud brick channels. Each leather Dina bucket felt heavier than a sarcophagus lid. When the moon waxes again, Nebamin the tax collector rides. Menna gasped, his shoulders screaming. How pay 300 Hecate grain tax to Memphis with this puddle? Downstream, farmers brawled over a silt-choked canal, fists cracking against jaws as women shrieked curses. A gilded temple barge drifted past, piled high with blue lotus blooms for Ta's feast, a floating insult to their thirst. Noon's crucible, beneath a frayed palm frond awning, Tanis served ashmera, sour sorrel flatbread, dipped in pungent dipset fish paste. Hoofbeats thundered like Sekhmet's wrath. Nebamin Kedemti, chief tax assessor, for Memphis White Walls district, reined his war chariot to a spray-scattering halt. Nile mud crusted his leather sandals as he unfurled a papyrus scroll weighted with obsidian. Menna son of Pekipu, 300 Hecate emmer wheat ode to the Parank, House of Life, temple granary before harvest moon. Plus 50 standard jars of barley beer for pharaohs said festival renewal rites. Menna's gut turned to ice. Last harvest yielded 400 Hecate. This year's hope barely touched 120. Noble Nebamin, see the river. The assessor flicked a gleaming copper deben weight hanging from his belt. Osiris cares not for low water. Pay or forfeit Hedi. He nodded coldly at Menna's beloved plow ox, the beast that turned their earth. Silence choked the delta air. Katie's knuckles whitened on his hoe. Iset buried her face in Tanis's skirt. Then, a sound like the sky tearing. A low, grinding roar that shook the earth beneath their feet. Menna wheeled north. A chocolate-brown wall of water, taller than a sycamore fig, surged around the river's bend. Happy comes, late and enraged. Menna bellowed. Nebamin's horses reared wildly as the family scattered. Menna yanked Katie onto the dike's spine. Tanis dragged shrieking Iset through rising foam toward the mud brick granary mound. The tidal surge hit, not the gentle swell of blessing, but Apophis unleashed. It exploded through the unrepaired dike section, devouring barley seedlings, swallowing fishing skiffs whole, uprooting date palms. Nebamin's chariot flipped like a child's toy, his scribes scrambling up a tamarisk tree like a terrified monkey. Chaos and courage, villagers became a frantic hive, lunging for floating baskets, nets, tools. Menna plunged into the churning maelstrom, not for Nebamin, but for Hedi. The ox bellowed in terror, legs tangled in submerged acacia roots. Bronze sickle clenched in teeth, Menna hacked at sodden ropes, the current clawing at his kilt, sucking him toward deeper channels. Happy, take my sweat, not my life's blood. Water choked his prayer. Katie, waist deep and trembling, hurled a hemp rope. Together, chest deep in liquid earth, they hauled the panicked Hedi onto the trembling dike as the flood crested, swirling debris-laden water around their chins. Dusk's reckoning. The devastation unfolded under Khonsu's rising moon. Fields lay scoured to pale limestone bedrock or drowned under thick, roiling silt. Yet Menna knelt, scooped a handful of sludge, and grinned fiercely through cracked lips. Kemet, black gold. The river's fury had delivered the sacred silt after all. Tanis pressed the cool, fecund mud to her lips. Next year's bread, next year's life, lived in this ooze. Nebamin, sodden and shaking with fury, demanded compensation for his shattered chariot. Menna faced him, silt-streaked but unbowed. Tell the high priest of Memphis, Menna honors his debts. But even the viziers seal bows to Happy's fist. He offered Nebamin a single jar of fish oil lamp fuel, all salvaged from his flooded cellar. The scribe, shivering violently, recorded with a reed pen clutched in blue-tipped fingers, partial indemnity received, 1 jar lamp oil. Balance owed, 1 chariot. Night's respite, villagers gathered atop the temple's limestone foundation mound. Priests burned precious Kifi incense, frankincense, myrrh, honey, pleading for Happy's mercy. Mena shared warm beer rescued from his submerged cellar. Katie played a haunting melody on a river reed flute. Isette danced barefoot, tracing spirals in the moonlit mud. Tanis pressed a crudely made clay Ushabti into Mena's calloused palm, a field laborer for their own afterlife, bartered from a delta potter fleeing the floodwaters. The river broke the banks, Mena murmured, watching frogs emerge to sing their raucous hymn to Hecate, but not our bones, not our spirit. As the swollen Nile calmed under the moon's silver gaze, Mena traced the high water mark on a sycamore trunk. Tomorrow, dikes to rebuild with mud and prayers. Seed grain to barter at Memphis market. Debt like a crocodile lurking in murky backwaters. But the Delta's ancient pact held, life clawed from chaos, harvest born of havoc. For the Fellahin who wrestled gods and grain, survival grew not in perfect floods, but in hands rebuilding what the river stole, season after season, for eternity. Story 4, Sekhmet's Hands, a healer's vigil in Memphis. The Memphis dawn reeked of donkey sweat, baking Aish Baladi bread, and creeping dread. Nebet, SWNWT, physician priestess, of Sekhmet's temple, cleansed her eyes with Dum Palm-infused water. Beyond her whitewashed Iwi house, the city convulsed. Potters' wheels whirred, coppersmiths' hammers clanged, bakers hawked sesame-crusted loaves. But Nebet's gaze fixed on the clay bowl steeping willow bark and delta honey for the child coughing crimson froth in the temple's infirmary. Sekhmet, lioness of healing, she whispered, turn your pestilent breath from this son of Kemet. Her apprentice Passer stumbled in, coal smudged beneath terrified eyes. The vizier's tomb site, scaffolds collapsed. 3 masons shattered like unfired shaptus. Nebet snatched her leather kit, bronze scalpels, linen bandages, vials of sheepen, opium tears, and a hedge ivory wand carved with spells against Wekadu, corruption demons. They sprinted past Ta's Colossus, through alleys stinking of garlic and stale beer. At Vizier Kai's half-built tomb, chaos reigned. 2 laborers lay broken, shrieking, his leg bent like a snapped reed, hoary silent, his ribcage crushed like a bird's nest. The foreman wailed. Set himself shook the poles. Nebet knelt beside Idu. Bite down. She shoved a leather strap between his teeth. Passer doused the compound fracture with MSW, fermented grain alcohol. Nebet chanted, Heka flows, bone remembers its form, as she wrenched the tibia into alignment. Idu fainted. She packed the wound with honey-soaked linen, splinted it with palm ribs and tight-wrapped strips. For Hori, only mercy remained. Nebet closed his dust-caked eyes, murmuring, Anubis, make his path gentle through the 12 hours. Noon's fever. In the infirmary, dim, reeking of myrrh and bile, the child Baki burned like a furnace. Nebet pressed a fenugreek seed poultice to his heaving chest. His mother Tarit, a laundress whose hands reeked of natron, wept. The cough demon entered as R.A. rose. Nebet palpated the boy's swollen neck nodes. Plague? Her blood chilled. Memphis hadn't endured the great sickness since Pharaoh Amenhotep's reign. She prescribed garlic paste rubbed on soles, thyme steam inhaled under a linen tent. Isolate him. Burn juniper berries at every hour. If black spots appear. She didn't finish. Commotion erupted at the temple gate. Muhu, a Nubian frankincense trader, staggered in, skin yellow as aged papyrus, clutching his swollen belly. A river demon, choose my liver. Nebet examined him, scara like saffron, abdomen taut as a drum. Bilharzia, the snail-born curse. She mixed an emetic, crushed pomegranate rind, bitter wormwood, and sour donkey milk. Vomit the demon out. Mahu retched violently. Passer recoiled at the wriggling blood flukes in the basin. Nebet handed him acacia gum dissolved in tamarind juice. This starves the demon spawn. Pray to Meretseger, she who loves silence, for she crushes parasites beneath the pyramids. Scorpion's kiss. As R.A. beat his zenith gong, screams tore through the weaving quarter. Nebet ran, her kit pounding her hip. A crowd encircled Weaver Henu, her forearm grotesquely swollen from a Deathstalker scorpion sting. Crimson streaks climbed toward her armpit. Amputate, begged her husband, holding a copper saw. Nebet moved fast. She tied a tourniquet of twisted linen, sliced the puncture with an obsidian blade, and sucked venom, spitting black bile onto the dust. Passer slapped on a paste of crushed onion and natron salt. Finally, a poultice of aloe pulp and turmeric root. Circuit, Scorpion Mother. Nebet chanted, "Withdraw your stinger." Henu's ragged breathing softened. The crowd exhaled as one. Dusk's wait. In Sekhmet's inner sanctum, Nebet lit Kifi, its scent of honey, raisins, and resin a balm. Baki slept, his fever broken, but exhaustion crushed Nebet's shoulders. Passer approached, trembling. When the Nubian vomited, my hands shook like palm fronds in a camsine. Nebet gripped his shoulders. Healing lives between courage and terror. Recall the Edwin Smith papyrus. Examine, palpate, discern. Your hands will grow steady. She pressed her ivory wand into his palm, the serpent of Wadit coiled around it. Sekhmet's power flows through this. Guard it well. Under Khonsu's rising moon, Nebet walked the Nile bank. Fishermen mended nets by reed torch light. She passed the plague house. Juniper smoke coiled from its roof like a serpent. At home, she ate cold lentils, studying her Eber's papyrus by sesame oil lamp. For the cough that brings death's shadow, acacia gum, honey, water. Poured down the throat 4 times daily beneath the dog star. Pounding shook her door. The tomb foreman, face ashen. He burns. The wound festers. Nebet grabbed her kit. No rest for Sekhmet's hands. Healing was eternal war against visible and invisible demons, fought with honey, spells, and stubborn hope. In Memphis, where life dangled by a flaxen thread, the healer's true power lay not in vanquishing all death, but in defiantly stitching light into darkness, one breath at a time. Story 5. The Merchant's Current, a Nile Voyage of Honor. The pre-dawn Nile whispered against the cedar hull of Memphis dawn. Nebaman, merchant captain, stood at the prow, linen cloak silvered by river mist. Behind him, the hold groaned with pharaohs' treasures. Lebanese cedar beams, Nubian gold dust sacks, Puntite myrrh amphorae, and 12 uncut lapis lazuli blocks from beyond retinue. Array Horikti, guide us past the cataract's teeth, he murmured, scattering barley into ink-dark waters. His scribe Katie recorded the offering on a wax tablet, stylus flashing in the gloom. First light Thebes docks. Stevedores chanted rhythmic hymns as they hauled the final cedar logs aboard, muscles straining under the weight. Nebaman inspected each beam for beetle bores under the watchful eye of his 16-year-old son Pasea, experiencing his first voyage. Rot sinks profits faster than hippos, Nebaman cautioned, tracing a hairline crack with calloused finger. A tax scribe pressed cylinder seals into clay manifests, demanding Debon weight verification. Katie logged meticulously, asterisk, cedar, 30 prime logs. Myrrh resin, 50 sealed amphorae. Gold dust, 15 Debon weight sacks. Asterisk, when a porter slipped, spilling precious myrrh across the dock stones, Nebaman fined him half a day's grain rations. Spilled luxury is Pharaoh's stolen dream, he declared, the scent of lost wealth hanging heavy in the air. Cataract crossing, Semna's fury. At the first cataract's roaring rapids, Nubian collect boats swarmed like water beetles around them. Chief Jebel, arms laced with crocodile bite scars, demanded toll, 2 gold sacks, or let Sobuk feast on your bones. Nebaman countered with Cypriot bronze tools, priceless in a land without smelters. Jebel's eyes gleamed like obsidian in the harsh sunlight. Katie drafted the bilingual contract in hieratic and Nubian script. Asterisk, 10 bronze axes, 5 spearheads, 2 copper ingots for safe passage through the roaring throat of the river god. Asterisk, as sinewy Nubian guides hauled the Memphis dawn through frothing chaos with twisted hemp ropes, Passer gaped at pharaonic cartouches carved high on sandstone cliffs. Those eternal names? Nebaman said, gripping the rail as the ship shuddered. Trade carved them. Without merchants, pyramids are but expensive sand piles. Storm god's wrath, Kemsine night. Near Abydos, the desert wind struck like Seth's vengeance, a scorching demon screaming from the western wastes. The Nile transformed into a churning, foam-flecked beast beneath the moonless sky. Sailors scrambled to reef the billowing linen sails as hailstones battered the deck like Anubis knuckles. Double-ash the lapis lazuli. Nebaman roared over the gale, wrestling rain-slick ropes alongside his terrified son. A monstrous wave swallowed the starboard rail whole, wrenching a amphora from its lashings. Katie clung to the mainmast, sacred scrolls tucked beneath his tunic as vomit streaked his chest. Nebaman invoked the Chaos Tamer himself. Great Seth, spare this vessel, a white bull with gilded horns for your altar at Ambience. Dawn revealed the toll. Sailor Mena vanished beneath the waves, 3 precious cedar logs lost to the current, but the lapis blocks remained miraculously dry in their oilskin wrappings. Nebaman poured honeybeer libations over the gunwale for Mena's ka. Prophet turns to ashes when we forget our humanity, he told Passer, the boy's knuckles white on the rail. Delta bureaucracy, per happy port. Customs officials descended like vultures scenting weakness. The Pernesit head scribe demanded manifests in triplicate. Prove this lapis isn't plundered from Queen Hedifir's plundered tomb. Katie presented papyri sealed by Theban viziers and Nubian chiefs, the hieroglyphic endorsements glowing in the dockyard torchlight. Nebaman discreetly pressed an electrum ring into a junior scribe's palm for expedited clearance. Then, disaster struck the scales. The gold sacks weighed light by 3 full deben. Organized theft, thundered the head scribe, summoning Medjay guards. Nebaman's reputation hung by a frayed flaxen thread. But Katie produced humidity records. Asterisk, Nubian river damp swells sack fibers by 8%. Reweigh with desert-dried counterweights from Memphis Treasury. Asterisk, the recalculated balance matched perfectly. Approval stamped, with grudging admiration. Moonlit betrayal, the lapis temptation. Guards snored by dying braziers when Nebaman caught Passeur's shadow near the lapis hold. Father, I swear by Osiris, silence. Nebaman's voice cracked like a hippo whip. Passer confessed. A Memphis merchant's daughter demanded 1 block as bride price, threatening to spurn him otherwise. Love clouds vision, but theft severs the ka from its eternal body, Nebaman rasped, heart fracturing like flawed alabaster. He condemned Passer to guard the hold until dawn without waterskin under Kansu's cold gaze. Our family trades in trust across 10 generations. Shatter that, and you're poorer than a leper begging at Karnak's gates. Market triumph, soaker's frenzy. At Memphis' bustling marketplace, Nebaman's goods ignited bidding wars. Architect Hemi paid silver ingots for the cedar to roof Pharaoh's new pleasure pavilion. Priestess Nebit purchased myrrh for Sekhmet's plague salves. The lapis? Pharaoh's master jeweler and 3 Syrian traders dueled with escalating offers. Nebaman auctioned blocks individually, the final piece fetching its weight in electrum. Total profit, 42 deben silver and 5 copper talents. Homecoming. Wife Tai adorned him with lotus garlands, singing hymns to Hathor. Nebaman presented Passer with a Nubian dagger, not for combat, but to sever dishonest bonds. Thirst taught you what feasts never could. To Katie, a lapis scarab amulet. Truth's light outshines all gems in Ma'at's scales. That midnight, Nebaman walked his scarred ship alone. Shipwrights patched storm wounds with acacia planks, the scent of fresh wood and river mud rising in the cool air. The Nile sighed against the quay like a contented beast. Tomorrow, new cargo, new currents, new risks. But tonight, he traced the ledger's final entry with soot-blackened finger, net profit, 42 deben silver. In the black land where desert eternally challenges river, merchants are the living current joining distant worlds. Their true wealth lies not in gold's weight, but in keeping sacred promises afloat between treacherous waters and the human heart's shifting sands, season after season, generation beyond generation. Story 6. Loom of Destiny, a Weaver's Rebellion in Akedaton. The desert wind carried whispers of heresy through Akedaton's sun-baked streets as Tia, master weaver of the Royal Kenner Guild, adjusted her headscarf against the relentless dawn glare. Before her on the massive temple loom, 200 linen warp threads stretched taut like prisoners awaiting sentence, destined to become Pharaoh Akhenaten's sacred Shendit kilt. "May Aten's rays bless these hands," she murmured the obligatory prayer, though her calloused fingers secretly traced the outline of an Isis amulet hidden beneath her tunic. Her 14-year-old daughter Nefru sorted dyed wools with solemn efficiency, madder red for royalty, woad blue for Aten's priests, ochre yellow for the condemned old gods whose statues lay shattered in the desert sands beyond the city's gleaming white walls. The air smelled of flax dust and fear. At mid-morning, High Priest Moiraira arrived with a phalanx of royal guards, their spear points glinting like malicious stars. By Pharaoh's divine command, he announced, unrolling papyrus hieroglyphs that praised only the sun disk, "You will weave his great hymn to Aten into Queen Nefertiti's new throne canopy. Gold thread throughout. Finished before the Heb-Sed festival." Tia's stomach clenched as she calculated the blasphemy. Each stitch would deny Osiris, Isis, and Ammonius. Refusal meant the quarries where her son Nacht already labored. The gold thread. She stalled, buying precious moments. "We require 10 full debonweight for such intricate work." Moiraira's sneer deepened into a crevice of contempt. "Your boy mines it at Wadi Hammamet. Fail, and his daily rations vanish like morning dew." By noon, the dye works courtyard simmered with secrets and steam. Tia stirred cauldrons bubbling with forbidden alchemy. Murex snails smuggled from Phoenicia bled precious Tyrian purple into vats. Indigo cakes traded for Nubian turquoise dissolved into midnight blue pools. Pomegranate rinds boiled with alum blazed like captured sunsets. Nefru whispered of market women hiding Ammonius amulets inside bread loaves, her voice trembling like a plucked harp string. With deliberate care, Tia added extra iron mordant to the blue vat, ensuring the Aten hymn would fade into obscurity within a year. "Some threads unravel faster than empires," she murmured, watching the dye swallow the cloth like a vengeful river. Behind a false brick wall in the weaving shed's deepest recess, Tia's true masterpiece grew under flickering lamplight, a tapestry of the Osirian mysteries. Lapis blue thread stolen from temple stores became Isis' protective wings spread over Osiris' reassembled body. Pomegranate blood-dyed strands formed Horus spear-piercing Set's crocodile form. Emerald wool from Cyprus swirled into Hapis river gods bearing sheaves of golden wheat. Every shuttle pass defied Pharaoh's edict, while Nefru stood guard singing Aten hymns loud enough to drown the thump-thump-thump of the hidden loom's seditious heartbeat. The scent of beeswax and rebellion hung thick in the air. Dusk painted the sky in Aten's colors when betrayal came at the cloth bazaar. Sculptor Thutmose slid Tia a limestone shard etched with a cryptic message. Beck seeks skilled weavers for discreet royal commissions. Suspicion coiled in her chest like a desert SP, but the memory of Nacht's mining scars, raw and weeping when she last saw him, haunted her. In a moonlit tomb chapel reeking of chiseled stone and myrrh, Beck unveiled his treason, a half-finished statue showing Nefertiti worshipping hidden Ammonius behind a hollow Aten facade. "Weave a curtain to veil him during temple inspections," the sculptor begged, sweat tracing paths through stone dust on his forehead. Tia touched the chiseled god's stern lips. "Ma'at demands cosmic balance. I shall weave your necessary lie." Midnight's terror arrived with the crash of splintering wood. Medjay troops stormed the compound, overturning looms and shattering dye pots. Moiraira tore through priceless textiles, screaming, "Where's the gold thread?" Tia feigned desperate tears, stolen by desert tribes at the last full moon. As shelves splintered under armored hands, they found only compliant Aten tapestries until Moiraira spotted the glint at Nefru's throat. He ripped the Isis amulet away, the leather cord snapping like a broken promise. "Wear the sun disk at dawn's procession," he hissed, pressing the cold metal disk into her palm, "or lose your lying tongue to the surgeon's blade." On Heb-Sed morning, the throne canopy shimmered under Akhenaten's approving gaze. Moiraira gloated as the royal couple sat beneath glittering hieroglyphs proclaiming, "Only the Aten is God." But as Ra's first scorching rays pierced the courtyard, the sabotage unfolded, gold threads frayed like rotten flax under tension. Hidden purple lotus blooms emerged behind Aten's sun rays. The phrase, "Eternal God," bled indigo onto Nefertiti's beaded lap. Panic erupted among priests as the crowd murmured. Tia caught Nefru's eye and whispered, "Now." The girl hurled a rotten pomegranate that exploded at Moira's feet like a blood sacrifice. As guards chased her through screaming nobles, Tia thrust a torch into oil-soaked linen scraps, flames devouring matter-dyed cloth before leaping onto the blasphemous canopy in a roaring chrysanthemum of defiance. 3 Nile floods later in Thebes, Tia wove funeral shrouds where Ammonius priests again ruled supreme. Nefru, now apprenticed to Isis temple weavers, studied a soot-stained tapestry fragment, Osiris' resurrection scene glowing defiantly through charcoal smudges. "You risked the red desert for this truth," she breathed, tracing a lapis thread. Tia touched a faded purple lotus. Some patterns must hide in the weave until the light changes direction. Beyond the loom house, the eternal Nile flowed, carrying away heretic kings and golden dreams, preserving rebellion's intricate pattern in the timeless fabric of existence. Story 7. The Embalmer's Oath, Shadows in the House of Death. The pre-dawn Nile fog clung to Thebes like a sodden burial shroud as Ipi, wetty mortuary priestess of Ammonius' temple, descended the stone steps into the Pernefer, the house of beauty where death met eternity. The air hung thick with the sharp tang of natron salt and the cloying sweetness of decaying lotus flowers, a perfume of inevitability that seeped into linen robes and bone alike. Before her on the alabaster slab lay Nacht, a fisherman dragged from the river's embrace at dawn, his skin stained blue-gray by Sobek's cruel signature, fingers still curled as if clutching invisible nets. "Anubis, opener of ways," Ipi chanted, her voice echoing against walls painted with demonic amit devouring unworthy hearts, "judge this Ka with mercy." Her apprentice Mena trembled violently as he arranged bronze hooks, obsidian blades, and cedarwood jars shaped like the 4 sons of Horus, Imsidi, Hapi, Dumif, Kabisnuf, their stoic faces witnessing the sacred violation about to unfold. With a hand steady as the Giza pyramids, Ipi made the ritual incision below Nacht's left ribs, the bronze knife parting flesh like river reeds. "Remember, Mena," she instructed, her eyes never leaving the crimson welling, "the Khat body is but a vessel of clay. We craft the Sa, the incorruptible vessel for the eternal journey." She extracted glistening lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, each organ washed in palm wine and nestled in natron-filled canopic jars, preserving them for Duet's trials. But when she reached for the slender curette hook to extract the brain through the nostrils, Mena gagged, pointing a shaking finger. His eyes, "Great Isis, they're open." Ipi pressed resin-coated thumbs over Nacht's clouded pupils, her touch final and firm. Drowned men fight Duet's gates tooth and nail. His bill lingers close, reluctant to depart the familiar waters. As Nacht's hollowed body lay submerged in a mountain of sparkling natron salt, 40 days of desiccation ahead, Ipi confronted High Priest Ankhef in the temple's incense-choked sanctuary. "The fisherman's widow offers only 10 Deben copper coins," she stated, voice tight. "Proper mummification demands 40 days of rites, resin from punt, linen of the finest weave." Ankhef adjusted his leopard skin mantle, cold eyes reflecting gilded statues. "Pharaoh Hormheb purges every whisper of Akhenaten's heresy from Thebes. Our coffers bleed gold for tribunals, not paupers. Make him adequate." Ipi's fists clenched behind her back. Adequate meant skipping heart scarabs, skimping on sacred oils, condemning Nacht's Ka to wander starved and forgotten in the field of reeds. That midnight, Shadows her only accomplice, she stole golden jed pillar amulets from the temple's innermost vault, symbols of Osiris' enduring strength. In her mud-brick home reeking of dried herbs and desperation, Ipi's daughter Merit measured linen strips by lamplight. "Mother, the scribe Casa waits by the date palm grove," she whispered, fear etching her young face. Ipi's blood turned to ice. Casa, her Nubian lover before Ammonius' priesthood claimed her life, before vows of celibacy bound her to the dead. He emerged from moon shadows clutching a papyrus scroll, his familiar scent of ink and desert wind stirring forbidden memories. Nacht's drowning was no accident. He breathed words like poison darts. He smuggled messages for Queen Mutnajmet, Hormheb's rival. Soldiers slit his net and weighted his ankles with lead. Casa pressed a tiny object into her palm, a gold scarab, glinting like a treacherous star, pried from Nak's stomach jar. Mutnajmit's royal seal. Melt it tonight, Epi, or your lineage ends at the executioner's block. On the 39th day, as Nak's desiccated form emerged from the natron like a brittle relic, Epi began the sacred reconstruction. She painted his leathery skin with precious cedar oil and myrrh, whispering spells from the Book of Coming Forth by day to awaken his senses in Duat. As Mena packed the abdominal cavity with Nile mud, sawdust, and myrrh-soaked linen, Epi slid the stolen Jed amulet beneath the bandages over Nak's silent heart. "For strength against the serpent Apophis," she murmured. Then, the gold scarab, proof of treason that could burn her world, burned cold in her hand. Bury it with him, ensuring his Ka carried the queen's plea to Osiris? Or melt it to save Merit's life? At Nak's desert tomb, mourners wailed the lament of Isis as priests swung censers, smoke coiling toward Ra's bark. Epi placed the stone heart scarab upon the golden scales before Anubis' jackal-headed statue. Suddenly, Hormheb's captain stormed the chapel, armor clanking. "We know the fisherman carried Mutnajmit's treason. Tear open the mummy!" Guards surged forward. Epi snatched natron powder from her belt, hurling it into the brazier. Flames roared skyward, engulfing the linen-wrapped corpse. "The spell of final ascension demands cleansing fire," she shrieked. In the choking chaos, she flung the gold scarab into the inferno. The captain howled as the evidence melted into molten oblivion. 3 moons later, Epi stood before Ankhef in the Hall of Judgment. "You defiled sacred rites with profane fire," he thundered. "Your penance, embalm Hormheb's executed traitors, alone." In the Pernefer's deepest, airless chamber, she unwrapped a plague-rotted general, the stench overwhelming. Kassa materialized like a desert ghost, pressing a clay pot into her hands. Mutnajmit lives in hiding. She sends this. Inside, 40 gold rings, payment for Nak's true rites performed in secret. That night, Epi painted Ma'at feathers on the traitor general's bandages with meticulous care. "Even the condemned deserve truth in the weighing," she told Merit, her voice echoing in the silent chamber. "For if Ma'at's feather trembles for one soul, the balance of eternity shatters for all." At dusk, Epi stood where Nak drowned, scattering blue lotus petals upon the darkening Nile. The current carried them toward the western horizon, tiny boats for the departed. In the house of death, where salt met secrets, fire cleansed lies, and bandages held both corruption and redemption, an embalmer's oath stretched beyond the reach of pharaohs, into the silent, starlit scales of forever. Story 8, Harmony of Stone, a temple musician's revolution. The first crimson rays of Ra ignited Karnak's hypostyle hall in liquid gold as Meresamen, Shemaiah, chief musician, of Ammonius temple, dipped her calloused fingers into the sacred basin. Kifi incense, honey-sweet raisins, earthy terebinth resin, and sun-dried frankincense coiled through the columned shadows like divine breath. Tonight's Opet festival climax demanded her harp guide Pharaoh's union with Ammonius statue, but the hymn scroll clutched in her hand felt heavy with heresy. High Priest Jedafor had erased Hathor's nurturing embrace, Isis' magical resurrection, and Mut's fierce protection from the lyrics, leaving only Ammonius Ra's solitary glory. To perform this falsified liturgy was to silence the goddesses who birthed creation itself. Her sistrum rattled faintly as if stirred by invisible hands, its bronze loops trembling like captive stars. In the musician's dawn-lit courtyard, Meresamen rehearsed with her ensemble, blind Nebet-plucking complex heptatonic scales on her 7-stringed Benet harp, the wood vibrating with ancestral memory, Kawit massaging sesame oil into taut Kafskan drumheads, preparing for hours of ritual percussion, young Ipi testing reed after reed for the lunar Mot ceremony's precise pitch. Suddenly, Jedafor stormed through the arched entrance, his leopard skin cloak flapping like a vulture's wings. He kicked over stacked bronze cymbals, their discordant clang scattering ibises. "Amplify the final verse when Pharaoh kneels," he snarled, spittle flying. "Make Ammonius' supremacy crack the very stones of Thebes." Nebet's sightless eyes widened toward his voice. "But revered one, the climax traditionally honors Mut's Jedifor's hand shot out, gouging deliberate scratches into Nebit's harp neck with his gold ring. Conform or haul limestone for Hormheb's tomb until your spine breaks. When his footsteps faded, Marasimon traced the fresh wounds on the cedar wood, hieroglyphs of intimidation carved in violence. At Luxor's bustling noon market, Marasimon traded her last silver manat necklace for precious myrrh resin to soothe Kawit's blistered, bleeding palms. A sandstone carver pressed a limestone chip into her palm, his dust-chapped lips brushing her ear. Asterisk, your brother Kabeknet faces 100 lashes at dusk, accused of stealing 5 debonweight of temple gold. Asterisk ice flooded her veins. Kabeknet, royal treasury scribe for 20 floods, guarded gold like a hieroglyph guards meaning. This was Jedifor's retaliation for her questioning the hymn. Amid stalls overflowing with faience amulets and dried dates, a Nubian spice merchant leaned close, cinnamon and conspiracy on his breath. The gold funds Jedifor's hidden tomb in the Western Valley. Your brother audited the ledger yesterday. Kneeling beneath Hathor's coward statue in a forgotten chapel, Marasimon scraped crumbling plaster from a niche with her sistrum hook. Inside lay the true hymn of the 10 hands, composed by her great-grandmother Nefret, its papyrus whispering with the power of suppressed goddesses, Isis resurrection magic woven into cascading arpeggios, Mut's protective fury thundering in bass notes, Hathor's ecstatic joy dancing through trills, all harmonizing with ammonious light. Nebit's fingers danced over the raised neumes as Marasimon unrolled it. Tonight, she vowed, sweat tracing her temples, when Pharaoh crosses the granite threshold, we play this. Nebit's smile was a crescent moon in darkness. Hathor's celestial cows will low from Duat in approval. Dusk stained the Nile blood red as ammonious golden bark approached Karnak, carried by shaven-headed priests. Marasimon glimpsed Kabeknet chained to the processional way's 4th pillar, his back a raw, fly-swarmed tapestry of whip marks. Jedifor smirked up at the musician's balcony. Her ensemble struck the opening chords of his falsified hymn. Pharaoh raised his crook and flail, the signal to enter the god's sanctum. Marasimon locked eyes with Kawit. The percussionist slammed her drum in Sekhmet's 7-fold war rhythm, boom 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 boom. The ensemble shattered the lie. Nebit's harp tore into Hathor's dance of the distant goddess, fingers flying like shrieking kites. Ipe's double flute wailed Isis' lament for Osiris, piercing as a bereaved kite. Marasimon's sistrum hissed like Taurit scattering demons with her knife. Hathor! Isis! Emi! Their voices rang out, goddesses' names echoing off columns carved with their stolen images, shaking centuries of dust onto Jedifor's shaven scalp. Jedifor screamed, silence them. But Karnak's very stones answered the true hymn. As Marasimon plucked the chord of Ma'at, a harmonic convergence of D, F sharp, and A resonating at 432 oscillations, the vibrations pulsed through the temple's sacred geometry. A false lintel above Jedifor's cartouche cracked like thunder, sandstone blocks tumbled down, revealing gleaming gold bars stamped with Pharaoh's winged scarab. A papyrus ledger fluttered like a wounded ibis, landing at Hormheb's feet, its columns detailing tomb funding stolen from widows' rations. Pharaoh's Medjay guards seized the shrieking priest mid-curse as Kabeknet's chains clattered onto sun-warmed stone. 3 Nile floods later, Marasimon stood where Jedifor's statue had been smashed to rubble. Nebit played the restored hymn beneath newly carved images of Mut's vulture wings, while priestesses danced with gilded mirrors, reflecting sunlight onto the inner sanctum's restored goddess reliefs. Kawit's drums pulsed like the heart of the inundation itself. Ipe's flute summoned the north wind carrying rain-scented promise. Pharaoh placed the gold of valor, a collar heavy with lapis and truth, around Marasimon's neck. Music, he declared before 10,000 witnesses, is the mortar binding Ma'at to eternity's pillars. That midnight, Marasimon reburied the hymn's scroll beneath Hathor's newly polished feet. The desert breeze carried notes toward the Valley of the Kings, a sonic scarab promising. When tyranny demands silence, harmony becomes revolution. And stone itself will sing truth until justice echoes in the deepest tombs of the oppressors. Story 9. The Flood's Fury, a Farmer's Covenant with the Nile. The Nile's breath felt shallow and weak as Menna, a fellow farmer of Persobuk village, waded through ankle-deep water at dawn, where chest-high kemet, sacred black silt, should have swirled after Soptit's rising. Only sparse patches darkened the cracked mud. His son Katie struggled beside him, patching a dike breach with palm frond mats weighted with limestone chunks. The gods sipped this flood like watered beer, Mena muttered, eyeing the listless river. Without the inundation's bounty, famine would stalk the black land. Their Gezira plot lay parched and cracking, only stagnant pools festered with mosquitoes where fertile water should flow. His wife Tanis scattered precious barley seed onto exposed mudflats nearby, a desperate gamble against Ra's fury, while daughter Iset collected river snails for supper, their empty fish traps mocking them from reeds. Not one frog sings for Hecate, Tanis whispered, invoking the frog-headed goddess of fertility, her voice swallowed by the thirsty air. By mid-morning, Ra's eye blazed white-hot. Mena and Katie strained at the shaduf, the counterweight irrigation lever groaning like a wounded hippo as they hauled meager water into crumbling channels. Each leather Dina bucket felt heavier than a sarcophagus lid. When the moon wanes, Nebamin the tax collector rides. Mena gasped, his shoulders screaming. How pay 300 Hecate grain tax to Memphis with this puddle? Downstream, farmers brawled over a silt-choked canal, fists cracking against jaws as women shrieked curses. A gilded temple barge drifted past, piled high with blue lotus blooms for Ta's feast, floating abundance mocking their despair. At noon beneath a frayed palm frond awning, Tanis served sour aish merah dipped in pungent dipset fish paste. Hoofbeats thundered suddenly. Nebamin, Kedemti tax collector for Memphis White Walls district, reined his war chariot to a spray-scattering halt. Nile mud crusted his sandals as he unfurled a papyrus scroll weighted with obsidian. Mena son of Pekipu, 300 Hecate emmer wheat ode to Parank temple before harvest moon, plus 50 jars of barley beer for pharaohs said festival. Mena's gut turned to ice. Last harvest yielded 400 Hecate. This year's hope barely touched 120. Noble Nebamin, see the river. The assessor flicked a copper Deben weight hanging from his belt. Osiris cares not for low water. Pay or forfeit Hedi. He nodded coldly at Mena's beloved plow ox. Then, a sound like the sky tearing. A low, grinding roar shook the earth. Mena wheeled north. A chocolate-brown wall of water, taller than a sycamore fig, surged around the river bend. Happy comes, late and enraged. Mena bellowed. Nebamin's horses reared wildly as the family scattered. Mena yanked Katie onto the dike's spine. Tanis dragged shrieking Iset through rising foam toward the mud brick granary mound. The tidal surge exploded through the unrepaired dike section, devouring barley seedlings, swallowing fishing skiffs whole, uprooting date palms. Nebamin's chariot flipped like a child's toy, his scribes scrambling up a tamarisk tree. Villagers became a frantic hive, lunging for floating tools as Mena plunged into the churning maelstrom, not for Nebamin, but for Hedi. The ox bellowed in terror, legs tangled in submerged acacia roots. Bronze sickle clenched in teeth, Mena hacked at sodden ropes, current clawing his kilt. Happy, take my sweat, not my life's blood. Katie hurled a hemp rope. Together, chest deep in liquid earth, they hauled Hedi onto trembling ground as the flood crested. Dusk unveiled devastation, fields scoured to limestone bedrock or drowned under silty. Yet Mena knelt, scooped thick sludge and grinned fiercely. Kemet, true gift of the black land. Tanis pressed the fecund mud to her lips. Next year's life lived in this ooze. Nebamin, sodden and livid, demanded compensation for his shattered chariot. Mena faced him unbowed. Tell Memphis, Mena honors debts. But even taxmen kneel to Happy's fist. He offered a jar of fish oil, all salvaged. The shivering scribe recorded, partial payment, 1 jar. That night atop the temple mound, priests burned Kifi for Happy's mercy. Mena shared rescued beer. Katie played a reed flute. Iset danced spirals in mud. Tanis pressed a clay shabdi into Mena's palm, a field hand for their afterlife. The river broke the banks, Mena murmured as frogs sang to Hecate, but not our bones. 3 floods later, Mena stood at the same dike, now rebuilt with stone facing. Katie operated a new Sakia water wheel, its pots gushing life onto emerald fields. The tax debts cleared, Mena said, watching Iset chase dragonflies. Tanis touched her Minat necklace, bought with surplus grain. Hetty lowed contentedly in clover. The Nile flowed calm today, but Mena remembered its fury. In the Black Land, where farmers dance with gods and grain, survival grows not in perfect floods, but in hands rebuilding stronger each season, their covenant with the river written in mud, sweat, and stubborn hope. Story 10. The Pharaoh's Shadow, a Bodyguard's Vigil. The desert winds screamed like Amit feasting on damned souls as Mahu, Medjay commander of Pharaoh Ramses II's personal guard, scanned the moonlit cliffs of Abu Simbel, sand gritting his teeth and stinging his coal-lined eyes. Below, the four colossal stone Ramses gazed eternally southward toward Nubia, while deep within the mountain, the living god slept beneath chambers painted with his victory at Kadesh. Mahu's knuckles whitened on his Kopesh sword hilt. Tonight's intelligence whispered of Libyan assassins slithering through the wadis. He signaled his 10 veterans hidden in rock crevices, their obsidian-tipped arrows dipped in Deathstalker venom glinting like malignant stars. Movement near the third stela, he hissed to Bakery, his Nubian lieutenant whose bowstring tensed silently. The air reeked of treachery and temple myrrh, a dissonant perfume of devotion and impending bloodshed. During the first watch, Kushite dancers swirled in the outer court, limbs gilded by torchlight, sistrums rattling like snake warnings. A Libyan chieftain approached Pharaoh's dais bearing an electrum chest. Great bull. Accept Kush's tribute. Mahu's raised fist halted advancing guards. Protocol demanded gifts be received. But as the chest opened, revealing lapis scarabs, Bakery spotted the false bottom, a viper's rattle taped beneath velvet. Who stumbled, spilling pomegranate wine across the chieftain's robes. In the flurry of attendants, he palmed the venom sack. Later, in the torchlit guardroom, he slit the sack. See? Equus pyramidum, stops the heart in 10 breaths. Bakery's eyes narrowed. Why not arrest him? Mahu sharpened his dagger on Nubian flint. The viper has nestmates. We wait for the den. Midnight unleashed a Khamsin wind demon, howling through the canyon, extinguishing torches, plunging the courtyard into stinging chaos. Nobles clutched wigs. Priests stumbled over fallen offerings. Through the blinding sandstorm, Mahu spotted 5 shadows scaling the shrine's northeast wall like black scorpions. Loose, he roared. Medjay bows thrummed. 3 invaders fell choking on venom. The 4th lunged at Ramses with a bronze Kopesh. Mahu intercepted, blades shrieking, disarming the Libyan with a wrist snap before breaking his neck with a brutal knee strike. The 5th assassin fled toward Ta's sanctuary. Mahu pursued through halls echoing with painted Ramses smiting Hittites, bursting into the Holy of Holies to find High Priest Pentaweret pressing a dagger to Pharaoh's throat. You taxed my family into starvation. Pentaweret spat, spittle flecking Ramses' ceremonial collar. The Libyan assassin grinned, handing him a ceramic poison vial. Mahu froze, 1 step, and the blade would sever the royal artery. You served Ammonius 30 years, Mahu said, voice desert calm, inching forward. This blasphemy damns your Ka to the devourer. Pentaweret's hand trembled. Ammonius abandoned Memphis to drought. Mahu's sandal hooked a loose floor tile, Bakery's signal. An arrow shattered the overhead oil lamp, burning rain down. As Pentaweret screamed, Mahu tackled Ramses behind Ta's granite pedestal. The Libyan's poison vial shattered where Pharaoh's neck had been. Mahu rose, throwing knives already spinning, one buried in the Libyan's eye, the other in Pentaweret's dagger hand. Guards swarmed. Ramses stood unharmed but ashen. Alive! Mahu commanded. Too late. Pentaweret bit a cyanide capsule sewn in his collar, foam bubbling on his lips as he hissed, Merneptah, hence. At dawn in the guard tower, Mahu interrogated the surviving Libyan under Senate rules. Truth earned water, lies earned heated bronze. Bakery glowed rods in a brazier. Who paid Pentaweret? Silence held until Mahu revealed the priest's suicide note. For Prince Merneptah's swift ascension. The Libyan cracked. Merneptah promised Libya independence. if Ramses died before ratifying the Hittite treaty. Mahu dispatched riders to arrest the prince. To the Libyan, you played Senate against a living god. The board always tips toward Maat. At noon, Ramses awarded Mahu the Gold of Valor before 10,000 troops. But Mahu's gaze fixed on Bakery, bleeding from a poisoned arrow graze taken during the chase. Temple surgeons labored as Mahu pressed his Sekhmet amulet to the young warrior's chest. "Fight, brother." Bakery whispered, "In my hills." I sang, and fell still. Mahu closed his friend's eyes. That night, he stood solitary guard as Ramses signed the Hittite peace treaty, the papyrus illuminated by a single lamp. The desert stars burned cold and distant. Power demanded blood, Bakery's today, perhaps his own tomorrow. 3 floods later at Pyrrhus, Mahu trained new Medjay. He raised Bakery's venom-tipped arrow. This killed a kingmaker. Remember, Pharaoh's shadow stretches long, but it's woven from loyal men who become nameless stones in eternity's foundation. A Nubian youth saluted, Bakery's nephew, eyes holding the same defiant fire. Mahu placed the arrow in his hands. "Guard wisely, boy. The desert never sleeps." The Nile flowed south toward the eternal stone Ramses. Somewhere, those granite eyes still watched for threats. And in the silence between palace intrigues and scorching winds, Egypt's true pillars stood not in quarried rock, but in sworn men who bled in darkness so Maat might bask forever in the sun. A day in ancient Egypt, the rhythm of the Nile. The dawn sun rose slowly over the mighty Nile, its golden rays shimmering upon the gentle ripples of the sacred river, the lifeblood of ancient Egypt. Along its fertile banks, life stirred to a rhythm that had remained unchanged for millennia. The people of Kemet, as they called their land, awoke with the first light, their lives bound to the eternal cycles of the sun, the river, and the seasons. In the bustling village of Perbestet, a boy named Hormheb rubbed his sleepy eyes as the rooster crowed. His mother, Hennet, was already up, kneading barley dough while the scent of baking bread filled their modest mud-brick house. The thick aroma mingled with the sharp tang of the morning air. Hormheb's father, Penihasi, a skilled farmer, prepared to head to the fields where the annual inundation of the Nile had recently receded, leaving behind a rich black silt known as Kemet, the very name of their beloved land. The life of a farmer was hard but sacred. Penihasi harnessed his oxen, guiding the plow through the fertile soil. Hormheb followed his father, learning the ways of the earth, understanding how the seasons, Ake, the flooding season, Perate, the growing season, and Shimu, the harvest season, governed their lives. Their survival depended on the cooperation of the gods, particularly Hapi, the god of the Nile's flood, whose benevolence ensured abundant crops. As the sun climbed higher, the village came alive with the clatter of tools and the soft chanting of women weaving linen from flax fibers. Hennet taught Hormheb's sister, Nefru, to spin the delicate threads that would one day become fine garments. The family labored together, each role essential in maintaining the balance of their household and the prosperity of their community. After his morning lessons with the crops, Hormheb hurried to join the village scribe, Pentu, for his schooling. Not every child in Egypt learned to read and write, only the fortunate ones destined for administrative, religious, or governmental roles were granted this privilege. Hormheb dipped his reed brush into black ink and carefully copied hieroglyphs onto shards of broken pottery called ostraca. Pentu patiently guided him, explaining the sacred language, the symbols that connected them to the gods and preserved their history. The midday sun blazed relentlessly, and the workers in the fields paused for a simple meal of bread, onions, dates, and cool beer brewed from barley. The villagers found respite under the shade of sycamore trees, offering thanks to Hathor, the goddess of joy and motherhood, whose image adorned their amulets and whose blessings were sought in daily life. On the outskirts of Perbestet, artisans labored in workshops, carving intricate amulets, shaping pottery, and painting colorful frescoes that depicted scenes of hunting, feasting, and worship. Skilled stonemasons hewed limestone blocks destined for distant temples and tombs. Even the humblest craftsman took pride in his work, believing that Ma'at, the divine principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order, was upheld through honest labor. Later in the afternoon, Hormheb accompanied his father to the bustling market near the temple of Batet, the lioness goddess. The air buzzed with merchants hawking their goods, fragrant myrrh, vivid turquoise beads, baskets brimming with figs and pomegranates, and bolts of linen dyed with rare indigo. Penihasi traded surplus grain for copper tools and sweet honey, while Hormheb marveled at the exotic wares brought by traders from Nubia, Punt, and beyond. The temple precinct bustled with life, priests in pristine white linen moving gracefully among the towering columns adorned with hieroglyphs and lotus motifs. Incense perfumed the air as offerings were made to Ba, protector of the home and fierce guardian against evil. Hormheb watched the temple cats slink among the worshippers, revered and pampered, their lithe forms considered sacred incarnations of the goddess herself. As the sun began its descent, the family returned home, their baskets heavy with the day's acquisitions. Hennet prepared a hearty stew of lentils and roasted fish, and they dined together, recounting the day's events. Hormheb shared his progress in his studies, his eyes gleaming with the dream of one day becoming a scribe in the grand city of Thebes. After dinner, the villagers gathered by the riverbank to share stories, play music, and enjoy simple pleasures. The rhythmic beat of drums, the melodic strumming of harps, and the sweet notes of reed flutes filled the air. Hormheb listened in awe as the elder, Jehudi, recounted tales of mighty pharaohs, battles won by the valor of men, and the eternal voyage of Ra across the sky in his solar bark. As twilight settled over the land, the villagers gazed at the star-strewn sky, where the constellation of Orion, known to them as Sa, glittered brightly. They believed it was the resting place of Osiris, lord of the afterlife, and a beacon guiding the souls of the departed. Hormheb's father spoke of the journey that awaited every soul, a perilous path through the Duat, the realm of the dead, where the heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at in the hall of judgment. Penihasi reminded his children to live justly, to speak truth, and to honor the gods, for the promise of eternal life was the greatest treasure. Night deepened, and the village slowly quieted, save for the distant calls of night birds and the soft lapping of the Nile against its banks. Hormheb lay on the roof of his home, gazing at the constellations, dreaming of the future. He imagined himself penning sacred texts, recording the deeds of kings, and perhaps, one day, serving within the grand temples dedicated to Ammonius Ra. Life in ancient Egypt was not merely a cycle of toil and rest, it was a harmonious dance with the divine, a perpetual honoring of the balance that governed all things. The people of Kemet lived with an unshakable sense of purpose, bound to the river that sustained them, to the gods who protected them, and to the community that nurtured them. The next day would begin as this one had, with the rising of the sun over the life-giving Nile, calling the people of ancient Egypt to awaken, to labor, to worship, and to dream anew beneath the watchful eyes of their gods and the eternal sky. Story 2: The Artisan's Legacy, Crafting Immortality in Ancient Egypt. The morning sun bathed the limestone cliffs of Deir el-Medina in a soft golden light, illuminating the small village tucked away on the west bank of the Nile, near Thebes. This was no ordinary village. It was a place of craftsmen, builders, and artists, those who carved the eternal resting places of the pharaohs deep into the Valley of the Kings. Life here was both a privilege and a burden, for its people, though isolated, bore the weighty responsibility of shaping the gateways to the afterlife. Among these artisans was a man named Mena, a master painter whose hands could bring the walls of tombs to life with vibrant scenes of gods, men, and the promise of eternity. Mena rose with the dawn, his body accustomed to the rhythm of the workmen's bells. His wife, Tia, had already prepared a simple breakfast of bread, figs, and a jug of date beer. Their son, Hui, eagerly chattered about his lessons for the day, while their daughter, Nevet, helped her mother grind ochre and malachite for the pigments Mena would use. Life in Deir el-Medina revolved around family, labor, and devotion to the gods. Each day, Mena and his fellow craftsmen, the servants in the place of truth, traversed the winding path to the Valley of the Kings. Their footsteps were steady, their hearts filled with purpose. They were building eternity. They carved and painted the tombs that would one day house the bodies and spirits of Egypt's divine rulers. To these artisans, their work was sacred, a communion with the gods, a delicate dance of precision, skill, and faith. The workman's day was carefully structured, with rest periods, allotted rations, and time to attend to religious duties. The community of Deir el-Medina was unique in its organization and social support. The state provided the craftsmen with housing, food, and protection, recognizing the importance of their task. Mena took pride in his role, for he understood that through his art, he ensured the pharaoh's safe passage to the field of reeds, the Egyptian paradise. Mena's workshop was a small chamber cut into the rock, where light filtered through a narrow opening. There, he mixed his paints, reds from ochre, blues from azurite, greens from malachite, blacks from carbon, and whites from gypsum. His brushes, fashioned from reeds and rushes, lay carefully arranged. Today, he was to complete a scene depicting the weighing of the heart ceremony, where the deceased's soul would stand before Osiris and have their heart measured against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth. With steady hands and unwavering concentration, Mena painted Anubis, the jackal-headed god, guiding the soul of the deceased. He painted Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, recording the verdict, and Amit, the devourer of unworthy hearts, lurking nearby. Each stroke was imbued with reverence, each symbol an invocation of cosmic order. Mena knew that his artistry would be seen by no living eyes beyond his fellow craftsmen, but to him, that did not diminish its importance. The tombs were not made for the living, they were designed for the eternity of the departed. At midday, the workers paused to share their meal of lentils, bread, and dried fish, often accompanied by tales and laughter that lightened the weight of their labor. Mena sat beneath a palm tree, discussing the teachings of the Book of the Dead with his friend and fellow artisan, Ka. They spoke of the mysteries of the Duat, the underworld, of Ra's perilous nightly journey through the darkness, and of the need to live a life of Ma'at to secure a place in the afterlife. Life in Deir el-Medina was not without its challenges. Supplies sometimes arrived late, disputes over rations arose, and illnesses could strike without warning. Yet the community remained resilient. They supported one another through hardship, their bonds strengthened by their shared devotion to their craft and their gods. The villagers observed festivals with joy, honoring deities like Hathor, Ta, and Ammonius with music, dancing, and feasting. The celebration of Opet, when the statue of Ammonius traveled from Karnak to Luxor, was particularly cherished, a moment of renewal and divine blessing. Mena returned to his work with the same dedication each day, carefully inscribing hieroglyphs and painting vivid scenes of the afterlife. He believed that his duty extended beyond his profession. It was a spiritual obligation. Every brushstroke was an act of worship, every pigment a prayer. His work immortalized not only the pharaohs but the artisans themselves, whose names and skills would endure in the hidden chambers of stone. One evening, after a long day's labor, Mena sat with his family beneath the starry sky, his son Hui nestled beside him, asking questions about the gods and the afterlife. Mena explained the journey of the sun god Ra, how he sailed his solar bark across the sky by day and through the treacherous underworld by night. He told of the perils faced in the Duat and the ultimate reward of eternal life for those who lived in harmony with Ma'at. As the years passed, Hui grew and followed in his father's footsteps, learning the artistry and sacred knowledge that had been passed down for generations. Mena watched with pride as his son mastered the delicate art of painting, understanding not only the techniques but the profound significance behind each symbol and scene. The cycle continued, unbroken, as father and son worked side by side, their legacy etched into the very walls of history. The seasons flowed with the steady rhythm of the Nile, and Mena's life unfolded like the painted scrolls of the afterlife. His hands, though weathered, never wavered in their precision. He continued to teach, to create, and to honor the gods until his final days. When Mena's time came, his family prepared his burial according to tradition, ensuring his heart would be pure when weighed in the hall of judgment. His tomb, modest yet lovingly adorned by his own hand, depicted scenes of his family, his work, and his devotion. The walls bore the story of a man who lived with purpose, who honored the balance of Ma'at, and who contributed to the sacred cycle of life, death, and rebirth. His name, inscribed upon the stone, became part of the eternal story, remembered by those who continued the work. In Deir el-Medina, life persisted. New generations of artisans rose to take the place of their fathers, carrying forward the skills, the stories, and the sacred duties that defined their community. The village remained a place of creation, of devotion, and of quiet, enduring legacy. The story of Mena and his fellow craftsmen is not merely a tale of labor and stone. It is a testament to the human spirit, to the desire to create something that transcends time, to leave a mark upon the world that whispers across the millennia. Through their chisels and brushes, through their sweat and prayers, they built more than tombs. They built bridges to eternity. The sun continued to rise and set over the cliffs, casting long shadows over the valley where kings and queens lay in their eternal slumber, their stories preserved by the hands of humble artisans who understood that their true reward was not in the fleeting praise of their time but in the silent, everlasting embrace of history. And so, the rhythm of life in ancient Egypt continued, as steady and enduring as the Nile itself. A tapestry woven by countless hands, each thread contributing to the grandeur of a civilization that, even now, speaks to us through stone and story, through pigment and papyrus, through the legacy of those who dared to craft immortality. Story 3: The Farmer's Journey, Seasons of the Nile. In the eternal land of Kemet, where the Nile unfurled like a shimmering serpent through the golden desert, life pulsed to the sacred rhythm of the river's ebb and flow, and it was in this timeless dance that Mena, a humble farmer of ancient Egypt, found his destiny bound to the black earth, the life-giving gift of Hapi, the Nile god. As Ra's blazing chariot ascended the eastern sky, casting warm amber rays over the fertile floodplains, Mena rose from his mat woven of reeds, his calloused hands greeting another day under the benevolent gaze of the gods. His mud-brick home, modest but sturdy, hummed with the quiet stirrings of his wife, Tia, who ground emmer wheat with rhythmic precision while their children, still wrapped in the dreams of childhood, slumbered a little longer, their bellies full from last night's lentil stew. Stepping into his linen kilt, simple yet functional, Mena inhaled the morning air laced with the scent of damp soil and sweet lotus carried by the Nile's breath. It was Akay, the season of inundation, when the river swelled beyond its banks, swallowing the land in a life-giving flood, a sacred cycle known to all Egyptians as the true heartbeat of their civilization. Mena, like generations before him, did not sow during Akay. Instead, he and his fellow farmers labored on royal projects, dredging canals, repairing granaries, or perhaps hauling limestone blocks destined to build the eternal temples for Pharaoh's glory, for in Egypt, to work was not merely survival, it was service to Ma'at, the divine order that kept chaos at bay. As the river receded, revealing rich silt as black as obsidian, Parate, the season of emergence, began, and Mena's days transformed into tireless cycles of plowing with wooden plows pulled by patient oxen, their hooves sinking into the velvety earth, while his neighbors sowed barley and emmer seeds, casting them like prayers upon the land. The rhythm of life was a symphony of nature's precision, the croak of frogs, the hum of bees pollinating blossoming papyrus, and the distant beat of temple drums where priests honored Osiris, the god of rebirth, who ensured each season would rise anew. Mena's hands grew rougher with each passing day, his skin bronzed by the unrelenting sun, but his spirit remained light, buoyed by the simple joy of family meals shared beneath palm trees, where he relished fresh fish from the river, figs, dates, and honey cakes prepared by Tia's loving hands. As Shimu, the season of harvest, approached, the land transformed into golden seas of swaying grain, and Mena, wielding a curved sickle, sang songs of gratitude while his children ran barefoot, gathering fallen stalks into woven baskets destined for the great storehouses that would feed not only his village but the temple priests, artisans, and soldiers who protected the two lands. The tax collectors would soon arrive, measuring grain with meticulous care, for the pharaoh's share was sacred and not to be questioned. Yet, even in the weight of royal obligations, there was pride, a deep understanding that his work sustained the great machine of Egypt, from the scribes who inked papyri to the grand vizier who advised the living god upon the throne. The temple of Ptah, whose limestone walls shimmered under the midday sun, would often summon Mena and his neighbors to partake in festivals where lotus-scented oils perfumed the air, where the sacred barks of the gods were paraded through streets lined with chanting crowds, and where bread, beer, and music flowed as offerings to the deities who held the balance of life. On quieter days, Mena taught his son, Hori, how to read the ancient hieroglyphs etched upon nearby stelae, ensuring that knowledge, the bridge between life and the eternal field of reeds, would pass to the next generation, for in Egypt, to forget one's name was to die a second, permanent death. The cycles continued, each season a brushstroke upon the canvas of time. Ake's flood, Parate's sowing, Shimu's harvest, over and over, as steady as Ra's daily journey across the sky. Mena's life, though tethered to the soil, was rich with rituals, offering bowls filled with incense and dates to the household gods, amulets of Bes hung upon the door to guard against misfortune, and moments spent gazing upon the river, pondering his place in the grand design. Evenings were sacred. With the day's toil behind him, Mena sat by the Nile's edge with Tia, their feet dangling in the cool water as the sun melted into the western horizon where the land of the dead lay, its shadows guarded by Anubis, the jackal-headed guide. They whispered prayers to Hathor, goddess of love and joy, asking for health, for rain, for the strength to see another season, knowing that life was as delicate as the lotus blooming in the morning only to wilt by night. Time in ancient Egypt was not linear. It was cyclical, a great wheel turning endlessly under the vigilant eyes of the gods, and Mena embraced this rhythm, finding purpose not in grand monuments or royal palaces but in the simple, sacred task of coaxing life from the earth. The scribes may have inked the names of kings, the priests may have built colossal temples that pierced the heavens, but it was the farmer's steady hands that ensured Egypt endured, year after year, flood after flood. When his hair turned silver and his back bent from decades beneath the sun, Mena found comfort in watching his son now guide the plow, his daughter weaving baskets as Tia once had, the cycle continuing without pause. On festival days, he walked slowly, leaning on a reed staff, to the temple, where he marveled at the statues of Ra and Osiris, their stone gazes eternal, knowing that though his own life would one day fade into the field of reeds, the eternal paradise promised to the righteous, his name, Mena, son of Kadi, would endure upon the walls his children would carve, and thus he would never truly be forgotten. In Egypt, to be remembered was to live forever. And so, through seasons marked by floodwaters, emerald fields, and golden harvests, Mena's story flowed as endlessly as the Nile itself, a testament to the quiet, noble life of those who worked the land, whose hands, though uncelebrated in the annals of kings, were the very hands that built the foundation of ancient Egypt's enduring glory. Story 4. The Scribes' Quill, Guardians of Knowledge. In the heart of ancient Egypt, where stone temples reached for the skies and the Nile's life-giving waters whispered to the reeds, there existed a group of men whose legacy would echo beyond the granite monuments and golden tombs, men whose words were etched in ink rather than carved in stone. The scribes, the sacred keepers of memory and order. Among them was Thamos, a dedicated scribe of Thebes, whose days began long before Ra's first golden rays kissed the alabaster walls of the temple. Rising from his reed mat, the faint aroma of burning myrrh lingering in the air, Thamos carefully donned his clean linen kilt, the crispness of its folds a small but vital symbol of discipline, for a scribe's life was one of precision, patience, and quiet reverence. In a world dominated by kings and gods, where the artisans built, the farmers sowed, and the soldiers fought, it was the scribes who recorded it all, who gave voice to the nation's heartbeat through hieroglyphs painted meticulously on papyrus scrolls, on limestone walls, and upon the sacred coffins of the departed. Thamos' father, Hormheb, had been a scribe before him, and his father before that, passing the sacred craft from one generation to the next like a priceless amulet, for to be a scribe was to wield power without sword or chariot, to bend time with ink and reed, to inscribe words that would outlast dynasties. Each morning, Thamos crossed the bustling streets of Thebes, the air alive with merchants hawking pottery, farmers unloading baskets of figs, and bakers selling fresh loaves of bread shaped like the sun's disk, all while the colossal statues of the pharaoh loomed in silent grandeur. The scribe's destination was the House of Life, the Per-Ankh, a sacred school and repository of knowledge attached to the temple complex, where priests, scribes, and learned men preserved the records of the kingdom, the inventories of the granaries, the rituals of the gods, and the words of the ancients. Sitting cross-legged on woven mats, Thamos' days unfolded in measured silence, his reed brush, crafted with loving care, dipped in black and red ink made from soot and ochre, dancing across smooth sheets of papyrus. Black ink was the color of life, the ink of everyday affairs, while red marked sacred names, divine pronouncements, and warnings of great importance. For color in writing was as meaningful as the words themselves. The temple walls around him were alive with scenes of gods bestowing favor upon pharaohs, of priests offering incense, and of scribes like himself recording the bounty of harvests and the victories of generals. His hand, steady and deliberate, traced the sacred symbols: the ankh for life, the scepter for power, the scarab for transformation, and the eye of Horus for protection, each glyph carrying weight far beyond its form, each a vessel of magic and memory. Yet, a scribe's work was not confined to dusty scrolls. Thamos often accompanied the tax collectors, walking beside the Nile's gleaming waters, counting sacks of grain, tallying livestock, and carefully recording the dues owed to the temple and the pharaoh, for in Egypt, nothing escaped the meticulous record of the scribes. His wax tablet, worn smooth by years of calculation, was his constant companion, capturing numbers, measurements, and accounts with a precision that left no room for error, for an incorrect tally could disrupt the delicate balance of Ma'at, the divine order, and bring disfavor upon the household or worse, upon the scribe himself. But Thamos' life was not one of cold numbers alone. His evenings were rich with stories and learning, for he believed that the power of the scribe was not merely in record-keeping, but in the shaping of memory and myth. Sitting beneath the sacred sycamore tree, with his son Baconconsa by his side, he recited the ancient tales, the journey of Ra through the 12 hours of night, the battles of Horus and Set, and the sacred hymns to Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, patron of scribes and guardian of secrets. He taught his son the sacred art of hieratic script, the swift, abbreviated form of writing used in daily administration, and the proper care of papyrus scrolls, which must be rolled tightly and stored away from dampness, lest time devour the precious words. Thamos' heart swelled with pride as his son carefully practiced the glyphs, his small hands tracing the same symbols that had shaped Egypt's history for centuries. Festivals brought brief but joyous respite from the ordered life of a scribe. During the great Opet festival, Thamos joined the throngs of people as the bark of Ammonius, the hidden god, was paraded from Karnak to Luxor, accompanied by music, dance, and offerings. It was during these times that he composed hymns and poems in honor of the gods, his words later painted upon temple walls, ensuring that the echoes of his devotion would reach across eternity. His role extended beyond mere writing. He was a judge, a mediator, an advisor, for the wisdom of the scribe was often sought in disputes over land, inheritance, or trade. His knowledge of legal codes and his ability to interpret contracts rendered him a figure of respect, his calm judgment seen as an extension of Ma'at herself. Though his world was filled with the sacred weight of duty, Thamos was also a man of simple joys. The soft plucking of a harp in the evening breeze, the taste of sweet date wine shared with friends, the laughter of his wife, Nefret, as she teased him for ink stains that stubbornly marked his fingers, betraying the scribe's lifelong affair with words. Years passed, marked by the rhythmic floodings of the Nile and the measured ticking of the water clocks within the temple courts. Thamos' hair silvered, his eyesight dimmed, but his hand remained steady, and his heart, ever faithful to Thoth, remained young. In his final years, he carefully oversaw the copying of the Book of the Dead, the sacred guide to the afterlife, preparing his own papyrus scroll to accompany him on his journey through the Duat, the perilous underworld where his heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. He instructed his son to record his name upon a limestone stela to stand at his tomb, for in Egypt, to be remembered was to live beyond death, and Thamos, the humble scribe of Thebes, wished not for gold or grand statues, but for his name and words to endure like the eternal Nile. On his last day, as the lotus flowers closed for the evening, he sat quietly by the river's edge, the temple's incense lingering in the cool dusk air, his reed brush resting across his knees, a lifetime of stories, records, and sacred hymns etched into papyrus that would long outlive his mortal form. And as the sun slipped beneath the western horizon, the land of the dead embraced him, and he journeyed forth with the confidence of one whose life had been spent in service to Ma'at, to knowledge, and to the delicate, enduring art of remembrance. Tamo's story, like the ink he once pressed upon papyrus, did not fade, but instead became another verse in the grand scroll of Egypt's eternal memory. Story 5. The Potter's Wheel, Clay and Community in Ancient Egypt. In the sun-drenched villages of ancient Egypt, where the streets pulsed with the rhythm of daily life and the scent of baking bread mingled with the Nile's fresh breeze, there thrived a humble yet essential craft that shaped the very vessels from which Egyptians drank, stored grain, and offered to their gods, the sacred art of pottery. Beneath the eternal gaze of sandstone gods and the ever-watchful flight of the ibis, a man named Kamudi dedicated his life to the potter's wheel, his hands stained by ochre and red clay, his soul tethered to the simple but vital work that bound community, commerce, and ritual together. Each day, as the first light of Ra's golden chariot crested the horizon and bathed the mud-brick homes in soft amber, Kamudi rose from his straw mat, his joints creaking like the ancient kilns that had served his family for generations. His workshop, nestled between the bustling market and the sweet-smelling lotus groves, was alive with the quiet hum of purpose, his wife Nanu already grinding ochre pigments while their young sons swept the sandy floor, their eager feet kicking up tiny clouds of dust as the morning breeze rustled the reed mats hanging at the entrance. The potter's wheel, simple yet profound, sat like a sun-drenched altar at the center of his life, a tool as sacred to Kamudi as the scribe's ink or the farmer's plow, its slow, steady spin a mirror of the Nile's ceaseless flow, its rhythm the pulse of his world. The clay he used, carefully harvested from the riverbanks where silt and earth melded into rich veins of malleable soil, was more than mere mud. It was the flesh of the Nile itself, a sacred material that connected him to the gods, to his ancestors, and to the endless cycle of life and death. Each morning, Kamudi prepared the clay, kneading it with strong, practiced hands, his fingers pressing out the tiny air pockets that might otherwise bring ruin in the fiery belly of the kiln. His touch was both firm and reverent, for he believed the clay remembered every caress, every flaw, and that it could betray or bless its maker depending on the care bestowed upon it. The village depended upon his vessels, jars for storing precious oil, amphorae for transporting beer, bowls for the daily meal, and delicate offering cups destined for the temple altars. And though his work was common, it was no less sacred, for in ancient Egypt, even the most ordinary object was woven into the tapestry of life, death, and the eternal. As his wheel spun, Kamudi's hands shaped the future, wide-mouthed water jars, slender-necked perfume bottles, robust grain storage urns, each form emerging like magic from the spinning clay, each piece a silent testament to the balance between function and beauty. His wife, Nanu, painted the vessels with ochre and black slip, adorning them with lotus blooms, falcons, flowing water patterns, and scenes of daily life, fishermen casting nets, women grinding grain, children playing by the riverbanks. These decorations were more than artistry. They were prayers, stories, and blessings embedded into the very fabric of the pots. His oldest son, Baki, had just begun learning the delicate skill of trimming the clay, carefully scraping away excess to reveal the perfect curve of a vessel's base, while his younger son, Dedu, still more interested in play, fashioned small clay figurines, crocodiles, cats, and even a miniature potter at his wheel, a quiet echo of his father's craft. When the vessels dried to a leather-hard stage, Kamudi carefully stacked them in his kiln, a dome of sun-baked brick heated by tamarisk wood and dried dung. The fire's roar filling the air as the village children gathered to watch the glowing dance of flames. The firing was a sacred moment, the trial by fire that determined whether the clay would endure or shatter, and Kamudi watched with a reverence that approached prayer, his hands never idle, always smoothing, stacking, preparing the next load. His reputation traveled beyond his village, his wares sought in nearby towns and even in the grand city of Thebes, where his simple pots graced the tables of scribes, merchants, and priests. At temple festivals, his vessels carried sacred beer and wine to the altars, his offering bowls cradled sweet-smelling incense, and his carefully crafted jars held unguents for the embalming of the dead, linking his humble craft to the great rituals of life and death that shaped the soul of Egypt. Yet, Kamuti's life was not only work and fire. It was laughter shared over fresh bread dipped in oil. It was the soft strumming of a lute as Nanu sang old songs beneath the stars. It was the pride he felt watching Baki's first successful pot emerge from the kiln whole and smooth, a perfect echo of his own skill. It was the community that gathered around his workshop, trading stories as they bartered for pots, sharing news of distant markets, of new pharaohs crowned, of battles fought on Egypt's frontiers, of harvests blessed by the inundation. His home was a nexus of connection, a place where clay, conversation, and community spun together like the wheel he turned each day. In the quiet evenings, when the Nile's waters gleamed silver under the moon and the fires of the kiln glowed softly in the distance, Kamuti would sit with his family, his hands still dusted with fine clay, his heart full as he watched Dudu play with his clay animals and listened to Baki's excited recounting of his latest attempt at throwing a symmetrical jar. He knew that life was fleeting, that the sands of Egypt would one day cover his workshop, that his name might not be chiseled on a temple wall or inscribed in a pharaoh's tomb, but he also knew that his pots would endure, perhaps buried for centuries, waiting to be unearthed by future hands, carrying within them the silent memory of his touch, his life, his world. In his final years, Kamuti worked with a quiet urgency, shaping vessels alongside his sons, training their hands to carry the weight of tradition, to honor the clay, to respect the fire, to understand that their work, though humble, was part of the great chain that bound Egypt's people together. His final pots, crafted with hands weathered by decades of toil, bore simple designs, waves, lotus petals, the rising sun, as if to remind those who would one day find them that life, like the potter's wheel, turns ceaselessly, that all things are shaped, tested, fired, and returned to the earth. When Kamuti's time came, his family placed his body in a modest tomb, surrounding him with the vessels he had made, a water jar for sustenance, a bowl for offerings, a small figurine of a potter at his wheel, lovingly crafted by Dudu's now-grown hands. They recited the prayers, offered bread and beer, and sealed the tomb, confident that Kamuti's name, though perhaps not sung in royal courts, would live on in every pot he had shaped, in every hand that had touched his work, in every vessel that would carry life forward long after the potter's wheel had ceased to spin. In the enduring silence of the Egyptian sands, where time moves like the patient hands of the potter, Kamuti's legacy remains, not carved in stone, but etched forever in clay. Story 6. The Weaver's Loom, Threads of Time in Ancient Egypt. In the warm, sun-soaked courtyards of ancient Egypt, where the scent of blooming papyrus drifted on the breeze and the Nile's steady murmur provided the rhythm of life, there thrived a craft both humble and essential, a skill that bound the sacred to the ordinary, that clothed farmers and pharaohs alike, the ancient art of weaving. Among the countless artisans who labored in the shadows of towering temples and bustling markets was Merit, a skilled weaver whose days unfolded amidst threads of flax, spinning whorls, and the ceaseless clatter of wooden looms. As the soft blush of dawn stretched across the mud-brick rooftops of her village, Merit rose from her simple straw mat, her joints still supple despite the years spent bent over her loom, her fingers already twitching in anticipation of the work that would soon begin. Her home, modest but warm, came alive with the comforting rituals of morning. Her daughter, Anipi, grinding emmer wheat for bread, her son, Hori, fetching water from the Nile, and her husband, Panihasi, stepping out to the fields, his linen kilt, hand-woven by Merit herself, catching the morning breeze. The village stirred as neighbors greeted each other over low mud brick walls, and merchants arranged clay pots and woven baskets in the market square, but Merit's world was the loom, the flax, and the intricate dance of warp and weft that would transform delicate fibers into garments, temple veils, and household linens, each one a silent testament to her craft. In ancient Egypt, linen was life, its threads binding not only the living but the dead, for it clothed the people, adorned the priests, and wrapped the mummies destined for the field of reeds, and it was Merit's steady hands that spun these threads of life. Each day began with the careful preparation of flax, the sacred plant whose pale blue flowers danced along the Nile's edge. She soaked the fibers, dried them under the relentless Egyptian sun, then combed them with wooden tools until they shimmered like strands of golden silk, ready to be spun into fine thread. Sitting cross-legged with her spinning whirl, Merit twisted the fibers with a rhythm as natural as the river's pulse, her hands moving in a practiced dance passed down through generations of women who, like her, understood that weaving was more than mere labor. It was legacy, devotion, and art interwoven. Her loom, built from sturdy sycamore poles, stood tall and proud in the center of her courtyard, its frame draped with carefully arranged warp threads that stretched taut, awaiting the weft that would bring the fabric to life. As the sun climbed higher, Merit began her work, her shuttle passing back and forth in steady precision, her fingers guiding the threads with a grace that came from years of dedication. The rhythmic thud of the loom's beam punctuated her thoughts, weaving not just cloth but the fabric of her family's survival. Each piece she crafted was destined for a specific purpose: soft linen tunics for farmers toiling under Ra's blazing eye, richly dyed sashes for merchants parading through Thebes, gauzy temple veils fluttering in sacred halls, and funerary wrappings prepared for those making their final journey to the afterlife. Though Merit's hands worked for the living, her craft touched the eternal. For every linen shroud she wove for the embalmers bore within it prayers, rituals, and silent hopes that the soul it wrapped would pass safely through the trials of the duet and find peace among the blessed. Her daughter, Anipe, sat nearby, learning the delicate balance of tension and precision, her young fingers fumbling with the shuttle as Merit gently corrected her, knowing that the weaving of cloth was also the weaving of memory, of culture, of the invisible threads that bound the past to the present. In the bustling market days, Merit's husband, Panihasi, proudly sold her linens, their smooth texture and precise weave fetching fair prices, while Merit traded bolts of cloth for fragrant oils, honey, and colorful faience beads. Her skill was well known, and even the local priests sought her out to commission fine linen for temple offerings, recognizing that the gods themselves favored the purity and lightness of her cloth. Festivals brought moments of joy and respite from the relentless pace of the loom. During the festival of Opet, Merit draped her family in the finest linen she had woven, soft and white like the clouds over the Nile, as they joined the throngs of celebrants watching the sacred bark of Ammonius glide down the river, its hull adorned with golden banners and bright flowers. The air pulsed with the beat of drums, the scent of incense, and the laughter of children chasing each other through the streets. But even amidst the celebration, Merit's thoughts often drifted to her loom, her mind tracing the patterns she would soon create, the next cloth that would slide from her hands like the steady current of the Nile. Her reputation spread beyond the village, and soon her cloth found its way to distant towns, to the priests of Karnak, and even to the bustling royal workshops where garments were made for Pharaoh's court. Yet, Merit remained rooted in her humble home, her heart woven tightly to her family, her craft, and her community. In quiet moments, as the sun dipped low and painted the skies in hues of gold and crimson, she would sit with Anipe and share stories of the gods, of Neith, the weaver goddess who spun the world into being, of Isis whose magic bound Osiris's broken body, of the sacred threads that connected all life to the divine. She taught Anipe the sacred patterns used for temple cloths, the careful counting of threads to ensure balance and harmony, for in Egypt, every number, every measurement held sacred meaning, a reflection of Ma'at, the cosmic order that governed the heavens and the earth. Years passed like threads sliding swiftly through the loom. Merit's hands grew lined, her hair silvered like the morning mist over the river, but her skill never faltered. Even as her joints stiffened, her fingers remained sure, weaving the same steady patterns that had clothed generations. Anipe took her place at the loom, her hands now confident, her work smooth and fine, her mother's voice guiding her still, like a faint breeze rustling the flax fields. Together, they wove linen for the most sacred of tasks, the funeral wrappings for Merit's husband, Panihasi, whose life had been as steadfast as the plow he guided. With tearful care, they wrapped him in linen so fine it seemed spun from the clouds, each layer accompanied by prayers for safe passage, each fold a tender farewell. Merit understood in that moment that her craft had come full circle, that the threads she had woven throughout her life now bore the weight of her love and loss, binding her to the one she had cherished most. Her own life, she knew, would soon come to rest among the reeds, her body wrapped in the cloth she had prepared, her name spoken by her children and grandchildren who would remember her not as a queen or priestess, but as a weaver, a woman whose steady hands spun the fabric of life, whose loom had shaped not only linen, but the very weave of her family's story. And when that day came, when her heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, she would stand before the gods, wrapped in her own cloth, her name carried in the breath of her descendants, her legacy secured in every thread that endured beyond her mortal years. For in Egypt, to weave was to remember, to create was to defy time, and to craft with devotion was to inscribe one's name upon the endless tapestry of the living. Long after her loom fell silent, the linens she had spun would pass from hand to hand, a quiet testament to a life bound to the turning of the wheel, to the sacred rhythm of the shuttle, to the threads that held the world together in the eternal land of the Nile. Story 7. The Fisherman's Dawn, Sustenance from the Nile. In the sacred land of ancient Egypt, where the Nile wove its silver ribbon through sun-scorched fields and stone temples reached for the heavens, life flowed not only in palatial courts or bustling markets but also upon the quiet ripples of the river, where humble fishermen like Nebamin began each day before the sun dared to rise. Nebamin, known simply as a man of the river, had spent his life chasing the glimmer of fish scales beneath the Nile's surface, his livelihood tied to the ceaseless rhythm of the waters that sustained the two lands. As the sky surrendered to the first hints of dawn, painting the eastern horizon in soft pinks and golds, Nebamin rose from his modest mud-brick home, the cool morning air brushing against his sun-hardened skin, the familiar scent of wet reeds and river clay clinging to his linen kilt. His wife, Hennet, quietly prepared small bundles of flatbread and dried figs for his journey, their simple morning routine a tender exchange, a silent acknowledgement of the dangers and necessities that marked a fisherman's life. His sons, still wrapped in the linen embrace of sleep, would soon follow in his footsteps, but for now, they slumbered under the protection of household gods carved from wood and clay. With his nets slung over his shoulder and his small papyrus boat moored along the muddy banks, Nebamin stepped onto the glistening waterway, his heart attuned to the gentle lapping of waves against the reeds, his mind already calculating the best fishing grounds, the shifting patterns of the current, the stories the river whispered to those who listened. The Nile was not merely a river, it was the lifeblood of Egypt, the divine artery that fed the granaries, quenched the fields, and carried traders and priests alike. It was a god in itself, a force to be respected, loved, and feared. As his oar cut through the glassy surface, Nebamin's calloused hands tightened around the shaft, muscles honed by years of toil propelling his vessel into the morning mist. Fishing was more than survival, it was tradition, a sacred craft passed from father to son, a bond not written on papyrus but etched into the very sinews of the fishermen who lived and breathed by the river's rhythm. His net, woven from flax fibers by Hennet's patient hands, held the weight of his family's hopes, its knots tied with care, each loop a silent prayer to Hapi, the Nile god, for a bountiful catch. With practiced grace, Nebamin cast the net wide, watching it unfurl like a sunburst upon the water's surface, sinking slowly to entrap tilapia, catfish, and mullet that darted among the papyrus reeds. As the sun's golden fingers stretched across the river, illuminating the white sails of merchant boats and the distant silhouettes of farmers tending their fields, Nebamin toiled, hauling his nets with steady resolve, his skin glistening with sweat under Ra's ascending chariot. He hummed softly to himself, ancient songs passed down from his ancestors, songs that echoed the heartbeat of the Nile, melodies that honored the river's gifts and pleaded for safe passage from lurking crocodiles and the unpredictable whims of nature. On some days, the river was generous, its depths teeming with fish that filled his boat to the brim, their silver bodies writhing in the morning light. On other days, the catch was meager, and Nebamin returned home with little but mud-smeared nets and the quiet comfort that the Nile's cycles, like life itself, would always turn again. The river was both provider and tester, a sacred mirror of life's abundance and scarcity. Beyond the daily struggle, there was a profound joy in Nebamin's simple life. The laughter shared with other fishermen as they exchanged news, the satisfaction of crafting new nets with his sons, the peaceful solitude as he floated beneath the towering palms, watching ibis and herons stalk the shallows with elegant patience. In the markets of Thebes, Nebamin's fish fed scribes, craftsmen, temple workers, and priests, his humble catch a silent contributor to the grand machine of Egypt's prosperity. On festival days, when the city's streets blossomed with banners and the sacred barks of the gods glided through crowds of chanting worshippers, Nebamin's fish were offered at temple altars, seasoned with fragrant herbs, a humble but worthy gift to the divine. His life was unrecorded by royal scribes, his name absent from temple walls, but his work resonated through every home, every table, every ritual that required the Nile's bounty. Nebamin taught his sons the sacred balance of fishing, the patience to wait for the river's gifts, the courage to face its dangers, and the wisdom to honor the gods with each cast and each catch. He taught them to mend nets with steady hands, to read the language of ripples and currents, to respect the crocodile's domain, and to never take more than the river could give. Evenings were cherished, a time when Nebamin and Hennet shared meals of fresh fish, lentils, onions, and beer, when their sons recounted tales of village mischief and learned the subtle arts of knot tying and oar handling. Beneath the endless canopy of stars, Nebamin found peace in the simple cadence of his days, his heart full not of ambition for gold or titles, but of gratitude for the Nile's quiet generosity. In the seasons when the Nile flooded its banks during Akay, when the fields disappeared beneath the silty waters and fishing paused, Nebamin labored alongside other men in canal repairs, dredging silt, and reinforcing levees, his hands never idle, his duty to the land and his family unwavering. He understood that Egypt endured because of this sacred balance, of river and field, of fish and grain, of man and God. Years passed like the flowing current, and Nebamin's hair silvered as his sons grew strong and capable, guiding their own boats, casting their own nets, honoring their father's lessons with every pull of the oar. His legacy was not written in ink but woven into the fibers of every net they cast, into the rhythm of their strokes against the Nile's surface, into the laughter they shared beneath the same sun that had watched over generations before them. When his time came, when his journey through the Duat beckoned, Nebamin's family wrapped him in linen, placing amulets upon his chest, and offered fresh fish, bread, and beer at his modest tomb, whispering prayers that his soul would sail safely to the field of reeds, where the waters were always calm and the nets always full. His sons continued to fish the river he had loved, their voices calling out to each other across the misty waters, their hearts steady with the quiet knowledge that Nebamin's spirit lived on in the rise and fall of their nets, in the stories they would one day tell their own children, in the eternal embrace of the Nile's sacred current. Story 8. The Carpenter's Hands, Builders of Egypt's Soul. In the sun-warmed workshops of ancient Egypt, where the scent of fresh-cut cedar mingled with the soft breeze of the Nile and the steady tap of wooden mallets echoed between mud-brick homes, there lived men whose quiet craft shaped the temples, homes, boats, and chariots of the two lands, men whose hands bore the weight of creation, though their names would rarely be carved upon the stone monuments they helped build. Among these men was Sabu, a humble carpenter whose life, like the smooth grains of his wood, had been carefully shaped by years of patient labor. As Ra's first golden rays painted the eastern horizon, Sabu rose from his mat, his joints stiff but his spirit eager, his fingers already itching to return to the cedar beams and sycamore planks awaiting him. His wife, Mutnefret, carefully packed his midday meal, simple bread, dried fish, and figs, while their children chased each other through the courtyard, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic clatter of chisels in neighboring workshops. Sabu's small wooden home, nestled along the bustling streets of Thebes, stood modestly but proudly, adorned with the everyday signs of family life: clay jars, woven mats, and carefully carved wooden stools that bore his signature craftsmanship. The tools of his trade, lovingly maintained, hung in precise order: adzes, chisels, mallets, and saws, each one familiar as the lines upon his own hands, each one carrying the weight of his livelihood and his pride. In ancient Egypt, where stone declared the permanence of kings and priests, it was wood that carried the pulse of daily life, shaping the objects of comfort, trade, transportation, and worship. Sabu's world was not grand like the halls of Pharaoh, but it was vital, and he approached each day with the quiet reverence of a man who knew his craft was a bridge between the sacred and the ordinary. His first task often led him to the lumberyards near the docks, where ships arrived carrying prized cedar from Lebanon, acacia from Nubia, and sycamore felled along the Nile's edge. Sabu would run his calloused hands over each beam, feeling its weight, its grain, its imperfections, speaking silently to the wood, trusting his senses to select the perfect pieces for his work. Returning to his workshop, he would prepare the timber, splitting, smoothing, and measuring with a precision that had been passed down from his father and his father's father before him. His days were filled with the steady rhythm of his tools, the whisper of saws slicing through fragrant wood, the tapping of chisels shaping joints, the scraping of planes smoothing surfaces until they gleamed under the bright Egyptian sun. He crafted household treasures, low wooden beds with woven reed supports, elegant chairs for scribes, sturdy boxes to store linen and jewelry, and beautifully painted wooden shrines to honor the household gods. He also built oars and boats for fishermen, carts for farmers, and, when commissioned by the temple, sacred barks that would carry the effigies of gods during festivals. Sabu's hands, though rough and strong, held an artist's sensitivity, and his eyes read the curves of the wood like a scribe reading hieroglyphs, each knot, each ring telling a story of growth and resilience. His finest work, however, was often reserved for the afterlife, for Sabu was known for crafting the wooden coffins that bore the dead toward their eternal journey. With reverence, he carved the sacred eyes of Horus upon the lid, painted the protective gods upon the sides, and constructed the box with careful joints meant to endure time itself. He understood that his coffins were not just vessels for bodies, but for souls, portals to the field of reeds, the paradise promised to those who lived in accordance with Ma'at. On market days, Sabu would carry his goods to the crowded stalls, his children proudly walking beside him, helping to display his stools, boxes, and carved figurines, while Mutnefret bartered for food, oils, and cloth. His work was respected and sought after, his reputation spreading beyond his village to the grand city of Karnak, where temple priests once commissioned him to repair the grand ceremonial bark of Ammonius, a task Sabu approached with the deepest humility and precision. Festivals offered moments of respite and joy. During the festival of Opet, Sabu joined his neighbors in celebration, watching as the sacred barks he had helped restore glided through the streets, adorned with flowers and shimmering cloth, the chants of priests and the laughter of children filling the air. Pride warmed his chest as he saw the people reverently touch the wooden railings he had crafted, knowing that his work had carried the gods themselves. His children, growing taller each year, began to learn his craft. Hori practiced cutting joints, while little Tia painted wooden toys with bright pigments, her giggles ringing through the workshop as Sabu patiently guided her hand. His sons learned to oil the wood, to read its mood, to respect its strength and its weaknesses, to understand that their legacy would not be written on temple walls but would endure in the things they built, the things people touched, used, cherished, and remembered. Evenings were filled with simple pleasures, sharing fresh bread and beer, listening to Mutnefret sing as she mended garments, watching the last light of Ra fade beyond the western hills where the dead resided. In the quiet, Sabu would trace the grain of a newly finished chair or run his hand over the smooth lid of a carved box, his mind at peace with the day's work. Seasons passed, each marked by the Nile's rise and fall, by the creak of boats he had built returning from the river, by the laughter and steady growth of his children. His back grew stooped, his hands stiffened, but his heart remained light, and his workshop remained his sanctuary. When his time approached, Sabu carefully crafted his own coffin, a simple but sturdy vessel adorned with the symbols he had carved for others so many times. The Eye of Horus for protection, the Ankh for life, the Scepter for power in the next world. His sons helped him paint the sacred spells, and his daughter placed small wooden figures inside, gifts from her to accompany him on his journey. On his final day, as the morning sun warmed the worn walls of his home, Sabu sat in his workshop, his hand resting on his last creation, content that his life had been well spent in the shaping of wood, in the teaching of his children, in the quiet, steadfast building of a life that, though simple, would endure in every stool that supported a scribe, in every box that guarded precious oils, in every boat that floated along the Nile's sacred waters. When his family sealed his tomb with prayers and offerings, they spoke his name, knowing that though no stone bore his likeness, the legacy of his hands would live on in the things he had built, in the laughter that still filled his workshop, in the memory of a carpenter who, with each careful stroke, helped shape the soul of Egypt. Story 9. The Brewer's Gift, the Ale of the Nile. In the heart of ancient Egypt, where the Nile's eternal waters nourished the fields and the chants of priests echoed against limestone temples, there thrived a craft as essential to life as the river itself, a craft that filled the homes of farmers, the tables of nobles, and the sacred offerings to the gods. The brewing of beer, the drink of the people, the liquid thread that stitched together daily life and divine ritual. Among the many who stirred the bubbling vats and tended to the sweet aroma of fermenting grain was Seisha, a humble brewer whose skill had quietly nourished her village and whose hands had turned the gifts of the earth into the golden ale cherished by all. As the first light of Ra crept over the mud brick rooftops, Seisha rose from her woven mat, the soft scent of malted barley lingering in the air, her fingers already recalling the rhythm of kneading, stirring, and straining. Her husband, Jedher, prepared to tend the fields, and her children, Merit and Kai, still rubbed the sleep from their eyes as Seisha set out to her courtyard where her large clay jars, her sacred vessels, waited in the morning sun. Brewing in Egypt was no mere profession. It was a lifeline, a daily devotion, a craft passed from mother to daughter, a tradition as old as the pyramids, where even the gods themselves, it was said, drank beer brewed from the labors of women like Seisha. Her tools were simple yet vital: large ceramic vats for boiling, woven sieves for straining, long wooden paddles worn smooth by years of careful stirring. She began each batch by soaking barley, allowing it to germinate just enough to awaken the sugars hidden within, then carefully halting the sprouting process by drying the grains under the same sun that gilded the temples of Karnak. Seisha's courtyard bustled as she ground the dried barley into coarse flour, mixing it with water to form a thick dough that she then partially baked into flat, sweet loaves. Loaves destined not for the table but for the vats where they would dissolve into a rich mash, the first step in coaxing the sacred beer to life. She sang softly as she worked, her voice weaving through the morning air, offering thanks to Tenenet, the goddess of beer and childbirth, whose blessings she invoked with every batch. The brewing process was both art and intuition. Seisha's practiced hands stirred the fermenting mixture with a wooden paddle, her keen senses attuned to the subtle shifts in aroma, the bubbling of the yeast, the gentle thickening of the brew as the Nile's waters worked their alchemy with the grain. She strained the mixture through fine reeds into tall, tapered jars, sealing them with linen and leaving them to ferment beneath the watching sky, her prayers mingling with the earthy fragrance of the maturing ale. Beer in Egypt was not a luxury. It was a daily necessity, a staple as vital as bread, consumed by laborers, scribes, priests, and pharaohs alike. It sustained the workers who hauled stone blocks for the grand temples. It refreshed the farmers returning from the fields. It graced the feasts of the wealthy, and it stood as sacred offering in the temples where priests poured it for the gods. Seisha's beer, rich, sweet, and nourishing, was a quiet cornerstone of her village's life. Her jars delivered to market stalls where they were eagerly traded for fish, fruits, oils, and linen. Her husband would carry the heavy jars on his back, their smooth clay still warm from the sun, while Seisha carefully prepared the next batch, her days a constant cycle of brewing, straining, fermenting, and serving. Her children learned the rhythms of the craft, Merit carefully shaping small clay stoppers, and Kai helping to grind barley, his small hands covered in flour, his laughter filling the courtyard as he splashed water into the brewing vats. Seisha taught them not just the technique but the reverence, the understanding that beer was a sacred gift, a connection to the land, to the gods, to their ancestors who had brewed in the same way for generations. Festivals brought special joy to her household, especially during the grand celebration of Hathor, goddess of music, dance, and joy, when beer flowed like the Nile itself and Seisha's jars were carried to temple courtyards where the people sang, danced, and drank in honor of the divine. She took pride in preparing stronger, sweeter brews for such occasions, adding dates and honey to her recipes, crafting special batches that would gladden the hearts of gods and villagers alike. On these days, her home became a hive of activity, friends and neighbors gathering to share stories, laughter, and song, the sweet scent of brewing beer mingling with the fragrances of roasted meats and fresh fruits. Yet, Seisha's life was not without its burdens. The Nile, giver of life, could also bring hardship. There were seasons when the floodwaters were too high, when grain stores dwindled, when brewing became an anxious prayer rather than a daily rhythm. Seisha would kneel before the household shrine, offering beer and bread to the gods, pleading for protection, for a bountiful harvest, for her family's health. Still, she endured, her steady hands never faltering, her spirit anchored by the belief that the cycles of life, like the cycles of brewing, would always turn anew. Her beer was known beyond her village, sought after by nearby merchants and priests who praised its quality, its sweetness, its life-giving nourishment. It was said that her ale comforted the tired, enlivened the feasts, and pleased the gods, and though her name was not carved in stone, it was spoken with warmth in homes and marketplaces. As her children grew, Seisha passed her knowledge to Merit, who began to brew with the same quiet care, the same gentle songs, her young hands mirroring her mother's practiced movements. Kai, though his heart leaned toward fishing, still returned to help during festival preparations, their bond woven tightly by the shared memories of clay jars, warm sunlight, and the scent of barley mash. In the quiet evenings, Seisha would sit with her family under the soft glow of oil lamps, sharing bread and beer, their simple meals made rich by the love and labor that filled each cup. She would watch the stars reflect upon the Nile's surface, her heart content with the humble joy of a life well brewed, a craft well tended, a family well raised. When her final days approached, Seisha prepared one last batch, her hands slower but no less certain, her daughter by her side, guiding the stirring paddle with reverence. She requested that her funerary jars be filled with beer, that offerings of her ale be poured at her tomb, that her name be spoken as her family toasted her memory with the drink she had so lovingly crafted all her life. And when her time came, when her journey to the field of reeds began, her family wrapped her in linen, placed small jars of beer among her offerings, and whispered prayers that her soul would find rest among the fertile banks of the eternal Nile, where the grain was always golden, the beer always sweet, and the festivals never-ending. Her daughter, now a brewer in her own right, continued the sacred craft, her mother's songs lingering in the steam of the brewing vats, her name enduring in the warmth of each cup raised in gratitude. And so, Seisha's legacy flowed on, not carved in granite but carried in the golden streams of ale, in the daily lives she had nourished, in the eternal river that forever bound the people, the gods, and the sacred art of brewing. Story end. The potter's wheel, shaping clay and memory. In the final quiet corners of ancient Egypt's bustling villages, where the Nile's eternal waters lapped softly against the reeds and the golden light of Ra stretched long shadows across the worn mud brick streets, there worked artisans whose craft shaped not only the vessels of daily life but the memory of a civilization, potters whose spinning wheels transformed humble clay into objects that would outlast their makers, preserving stories in earthen forms long after voices had faded. Among them was Packham, an aged potter whose hands bore the smooth calluses of decades spent shaping the earth itself, whose simple workshop hummed with the rhythm of spinning wheels, the soft slap of wet clay, and the low melodies he hummed as he worked. As the dawn light slipped gently over the eastern hills, Packham rose from his mat, his joints slow but steady, his heart still tethered to the comfort of his craft, the patient dance between his fingers and the pliable clay drawn from the Nile's fertile banks. His wife, Iset, quietly prepared their morning meal, a few figs, fresh flatbread, and a small jug of beer, while the muffled sounds of the village awakening drifted in from the streets. Farmers heading to the fields, merchants loading baskets, fishermen calling to one another from the river's edge. But Packham's world was the wheel, the kiln, the clay that clung to his skin and stained his garments, the simple but sacred cycle of shaping, firing, and painting. His home, modest but warm, was lined with shelves stacked high with his creations, amphorae for wine, slender-necked jars for fragrant oils, wide bowls for communal meals, painted vessels bearing scenes of lotus flowers, papyrus reeds, and sacred symbols honoring the gods. His tools were few but essential: a spinning wheel of worn sycamore, shaped stones for smoothing, carved wooden paddles, and his own practiced hands that molded clay with the wisdom of years. In Egypt, pottery was the silent backbone of life. It held the grain that fed the nation, the water that quenched the workers, the oils that anointed the living and the dead, the offerings left at temple altars and village shrines. Packham's jars traveled beyond his village, carried on boats to bustling markets in Thebes, Karnak, and Memphis, his work cradled in the arms of merchants, priests, and farmers alike. Yet, for all their reach, his hands remained grounded, spinning his wheel beneath the same woven canopy, his heart steady in the simple joy of shaping the earth. His day began with careful preparation, walking to the riverbank to dig soft, silted clay, rich with the Nile's life-giving minerals. He sifted it by hand, removing stones and debris, kneading it with his feet until it yielded a smooth, pliable texture ready to become vessels of purpose and beauty. He lifted the moist clay onto his wheel, gently pressing his foot against the wooden treadle, setting the wheel into motion with a rhythm as natural to him as breathing. As the wheel spun, his hands coaxed the lump of earth into shape, his fingers guiding the form upward, balancing pressure and release, tension and softness, crafting wide jars, slender-necked vases, sturdy bowls, and small drinking cups. The dance between his fingers and the spinning clay was intimate, timeless, passed down from his father and his father's father, a lineage of potters who, like him, understood that to shape clay was to shape memory, to spin vessels that would outlast the hand that made them. His wife, Iset, and their daughter, Beneret, worked beside him, decorating the fired pots with mineral paints, etching delicate lotus motifs, painting bands of red, black, and ochre, each design imbued with the quiet hope that the vessel would serve its purpose well, whether at a humble table or in the sacred rites of the dead. Packham taught Beneret the language of the wheel, the need for patience, for steady breath, for the delicate balance between firmness and tenderness, for the silent dialogue between potter and clay. He taught her to feel the subtle tremble of the spinning form, to trust her hands, to know when to push and when to let go, lessons that stretched beyond the workshop into the very heart of life. On market days, Packham's family carried their wares to the village square, arranging rows of gleaming pottery under the warm Egyptian sun, the rich scent of baked clay mingling with the fragrances of roasted fish, honeyed cakes, and baskets of dates. His work was sought after, respected for its fine shape, its smooth finish, its balanced weight. Temple priests purchased his amphory to store sacred oils and offerings. Merchants filled his jars with wine and grain. Farmers used his pots to hold their daily meals. Festivals brought vibrant moments when his vessels became part of grand celebrations. During the festival of Batet, when laughter, music, and dancing filled the streets, Packham's painted cups overflowed with sweet beer and wine, his bowls brimming with figs and lentils as families gathered to share in the joy of life and the blessings of the gods. He found quiet pride in knowing that his humble creations carried the weight of these moments, holding both sustenance and memory. Yet, his work was also bound to the rites of death. Packham crafted burial jars to hold oils, perfumes, and sacred resins, knowing his vessels would accompany the dead into the afterlife. His hands shaped the canopic jars that would protect the organs of the departed, each lid carefully carved in the likeness of the 4 sons of Horus. He understood the sacredness of this work, that his pots were not merely containers but guardians of the soul's journey, vessels that would rest in tombs for eternity, sealed with prayers and offerings. As years passed, his steps slowed, his hands trembled faintly, but his will continued to spin. Beneret's skill blossomed, her hands steady and confident, her painted patterns intricate and graceful. Together, they worked in harmony, their silent bond woven through clay and time, their love poured into each vessel they shaped. On quiet evenings, after the fires of the kiln dimmed and the village settled beneath the canopy of stars, Packham sat beside his wife and daughter, sharing bread, beer, and stories, watching the flicker of oil lamps dance across the smooth surfaces of their pots, his heart full of simple contentment. His life, though humble, had been well-shaped, like the pots he made, strong, useful, beautiful in its quiet purpose. When his final day approached, Packham crafted his last jar, his touch gentle, his breath steady, shaping a vessel meant to hold the offerings for his own journey to the field of reeds. Beneret helped him seal it, her fingers brushing his as they painted the final symbols, a father and daughter bound by the sacred art they shared. When he passed, his family honored him with the rituals he had prepared for others so many times. His jars held the oils and perfumes that anointed his body. His pots cradled the food and drink meant to nourish his soul in the afterlife. His wheel, now still, a silent monument to a life spent in devotion to craft and family. His daughter continued his work, her hands guiding the wheel, her father's voice echoing in her memory, his legacy alive in every vessel she shaped, in every pot that found its way to the homes, the temples, the tombs of Egypt. In time, the pots he crafted would shatter, the houses he supplied would crumble, but fragments of his work would endure beneath the sands, quiet testaments to a life shaped in clay and love, a story told not in grand monuments but in the spinning of a humble wheel, in the silent dance of potter and earth, in the simple, enduring beauty of the vessels that carried the heart of Egypt.